Chapter 244. Ouch! 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 The mighty Sea King, Sky Wizard, and Alliance Deputy Commander Duke Marcus was in a small wooden hut, nursing his wounds. Sir, you have no self-respect. There is no need for you to accommodate that wild woman from Kuel Salis. As a powerful wizard who deserves the most perfect protection, as an important minister of Stormwind, as one of the most important figures in the Alliance, you should consider finding a suitable noble lady to marry. Instead of running to those wild women who jump around in the forest all day and getting beaten up. Gavinrad was using holy light to treat Duque's wounds. Duque grimaced, but did not refute Gavinrad's words. This did not mean that Duque approved of it. It was just that it was useless to say anything. Gavinrad Misfortune, as the most capable of fighting among the new generation of Stormwind City nobles, was forced by Lothar to attend Archbishop Fael's ceremony and became one of the 7 Holy Knights. Unfortunately, among the 7 Holy Knights, Gavinrad's strength was only above the weakest Windsor, and even below Bolvar, whom Duque had forced in. As one of the 5 Holy Knights in history, Gavinrad also had the least presence. In the later Battle of Andoril, Gavinrad died at the hands of Arthas, who had turned into a Death Knight. It was not that Gavinrad was weak. In terms of strength, if the strongest Uther was defined as the maximum value of 100, then Gavinrad would be around 82. It was probably at an excellent level. The main reason was that the other Holy Knights were too arrogant. His natural strength was not off the charts, coupled with a large amount of aristocratic thinking and a lack of devotion to the holy light, his performance in history was not outstanding enough. As a guard, his performance was enough to make Duque feel at ease. Even though he knew that Gavinrad was doing it for Duque's own good, sometimes some words were very harsh, such as, "Sir Marcus, if you need to vent, I would suggest that you." Gavinrad glanced at Vanessa, and then said in a deadpan manner, "Find a maid, such as Vanessa, that would be good. After all, she is one of us, Anne." Vanessa's embarrassment turned into anger. She used shadow steps to flash behind Gavinrad and used backstab. However, paladins were like cockroaches that couldn't be killed. Moreover, Vanessa's training was far from perfect. To everyone's surprise, Gavinrad turned around and punched Vanessa and her dagger away with a fist that was glowing with holy light. "Oh, it's fine if Vanessa doesn't want to. However, my first teacher back then was my maid. Even today, when I wasn't married, she was still my lover. My lord, you should understand that marriage between nobles is very prudent." On the other side, little Vanessa roared, "Asshole, I won't let you off. Hey, Vanessa is my maid." "Of course, sir. I'll try my best not to hurt her." As he spoke, Gavinrad sent Vanessa flying with another punch. All right. I know which family I'm going to marry. Don't talk about this anymore." "Understood, my lord." Apart from thinking like a noble, Gavinrad was also an excellent paladin. However, that was all. Duque would send Windsor to help him control the Marcus family's private army, but he would not let Gavinrad go. In the following days, the relationship between Duque and Aurelia. How should it be said? It should be normalized. Things would go as they should. They would not be overly intimate, nor would there be any so-called estrangement. The two got along naturally. The only problem was that Aurelia still often treated Duque as a child. Lothar also teased Duque from time to time, saying that he had occupied the 2 most beautiful elven rangers, but could not eat either of them. Time entered November 11th, Lothar found that there was nothing that could make him laugh. The Griffin sentries stationed near the wetlands, near the mountains around Iron Stove Castle, had returned, almost as corpses. In order to ambush them, the Horde had sent out a large number of search teams. Proudmoore's ship had also returned. And Duque's Naga scouts. They all brought the same bad news. The Horde had seized more than 90% of the land of the dwarf kingdom of Cosmodan, and began to use the dwarven mines to build their own ships. Unlike the wooden transport ships before, the ships were large and rough iron ships. They were very clumsy, but they could carry thousands of orcs in their cabins. These ships would quickly carry the horde across the water. Their target was obviously South Shore, or to be precise, the west coast of South Shore. Because these days, there had been countless horde scouting boats trying to pass through the Naga and Murlocs to investigate the movement on the west coast. South Shore, on the other hand, did not have a single horde scouting boat. It was completely like an abandoned target. It seemed that if the horde successfully landed on the west coast of Hillsbrad, they would be at the midpoint between here and Gilneas, not far from the territories of Gilneas, Dalajan, and Alterac. Then the horde would have the initiative, and the orcs could attack in any direction. If the alliance could move quickly, they could wait for the horde to arrive and fight them head-on. Gather the army. Lothar roared, abandon everything we don't need. If we are alive, we can send people back later. Now, we just need to maintain speed. Let's go. Let's go. When his other adjutants were about to go out of the headquarters to gather their own troops, Lothar turned around and looked at Duque. The king stood next to him. Sorry, your South Shore defense line seems to be useless. The horde has changed a great chief, and it feels much smarter. Lothar comforted the young Duque. Not only Lothar, but many others also gave Duque a comforting look. Everyone knew that Duque had spent an unimaginable amount of effort to build the South Shore defense line. As the representative of the elves, Aurelia also attended the meeting. She almost wanted to go up and comfort Duque. At this moment, Duque suddenly spoke. General Lothar, do you want the few elites of the Alliance to fight against the horde in the open wilderness? Lothar looked a little unhappy. What else can we do? We can't control where the horde will land. We can't set up a long defense line along the entire Hillsbrad coastline at this time. If the horde lands on the west coast, they will directly bypass your defense line in the direction of the sea in South Shore, and all the Alliance troops will be surrounded and annihilated in South Shore. Lothar was half explaining and half commanding to Duke as a senior tactician. At this time, he and Aurelia both saw the corner of Duque's mouth raised. Then let the horde come to South Shore themselves to die. Duque snapped his fingers, and Windsor immediately understood. He walked out of the command post and waved 2 red flags high. Then the next moment, countless forts suddenly appeared on the hills in the distance where there was only green. Lothar and the others were stunned. Chapter 245. That's impossible. One by one, the green trees fell to the ground, revealing the behemoths behind them. They were grayish-white fortresses of varying heights, some with 2 floors, some with 4, and some with 5 floors. They followed the winding terrain of the hills by the beach, extending all the way to the horizon. How many fortresses were there? It was as if Duque had captured all the stonemasons and carpenters in the world overnight and made them work for 100 years in an instant. King Tyrrhenas and the others were not familiar with Duke. Even Leon and Lothar, who had witnessed the miracle of cement, were confused. When did Duke get so much cement? When did he organize the craftsmen to make so many fortresses? He had practically fortified the entire coastline. Not only the leaders in the command center, but even the soldiers who passed by the mountain could not help but point at the things on the mountain. Seeing Duke conjuring up so many bunkers like magic, everyone in the command post felt a sense of reverence as if they were worshipping a ghost or a god. Are all these real? Lothar could not even speak properly. Fake. Most of them. Duke shrugged his shoulders and shrugged. Also, spreading the troops evenly across a long defensive line is the work of a fool. I don't want to do such a thing. Then, Duque raised his chin and waved at Windsor. 2 of Duque's private soldiers carried a fortress over. The leaders in the command center were stunned again. That's right, 2 people carrying a fortress that weighed who knew how many tons. Wait. Finally, a sharp-eyed fellow saw the problem. It was the color of wood. Wait. This so-called fortress is all made of wood? King Salas of Stormguard could not help but ask. Duque smiled in a self-righteous manner. Of course, in the eyes of the other kings, it was a sneaky smile. To be precise, most of it is made of very thin planks with a wooden frame. Don't worry, it's very sturdy. Unless there's a strong gust of wind for more than a day, it won't break. A group of big shots walked out of the command center and looked at the bunker again and again. They could not help but praise Duque's wonderful idea. At first glance, it looked like a complete house, but in fact, all the materials used were minimized. The inside was filled with wooden planks and strips, and the outside was smeared with lime and mud, making it look like a blockhouse made of bricks and wood. If one were to look at it from afar, no one would be able to tell that it was just for show. Not to mention ballistae and cannonballs, even an arrow would be able to pierce through this thing. The problem was, if so many of them were placed on the hill, it would be very tall. It was a steel line of defense. Duque clapped his hands. All right, I've arranged for the javelin throwers to be stationed at the key points. Next, I'll have to trouble Aurelia to send half of her rangers to defend the key points. Together with Admiral Dalen's patrol ships and my mere people, there should be no loopholes. General Dylin was obviously delighted. Aurelia, on the other hand, rolled her eyes at Duque flirtatiously. The flirtatious look was fake. The main thing was that Aurelia remembered how Duque had tricked her into tracking him. Those eyes were clearly saying, "Little thief, you're the most cunning of all." Of course, it was a different matter from how others saw it. King Alterac Eden muttered unhappily, "Didn't you say that the tribe changed to a new chief? Is this guy smarter than before? Will he fall for it?" This was indeed a problem. But it was not a problem for Duque. After the demonstration, everyone returned to the command center. Hee. In fact, this new great chieftain has always been my and Lothar's old rival. Duque laughed heartily as he looked at Lothar. Black Hand is just a brute. All his previous strategies were the ideas of his deputy, the current chief, Orgrim. If you pay attention, you'll find that this guy's fighting style is actually the same as his opponent's sudden inspiration in the Elven Forest. Lothar rubbed his chin as he recalled the past. Yes, I'm also curious about the enemy's commander. He can fight head-on and has strategies and tactics. I thought he was an enemy with a strong sense of the big picture. I had my doubts for a long time after killing Black Hand. Such a smart guy shouldn't have challenged me to a duel. Hey! You haven't answered my question yet. King Eden was very unhappy. Why do you think he'll definitely send the tribe to their deaths at South Shore, where we have the best defense? Based on the fact that I understand my enemy. Based on the fact that they will think. Since we are going to attack by force anyway, we might as well attack the place with the best landing conditions. Duke purposely paused for a moment. There must be people who are not convinced by my words, right? Humph. King Eden snorted coldly. Duke raised his right hand and pointed his thumb at the huge block of ice that was placed next to the window of the command center. During the previous alliance meeting, some people questioned whether that ugly head belonged to the tribe's chief. Now we can try it. If the tribe really refuses to come, we'll hang the head at the gate of South Shore and raise the war flag we stole. We'll know whether these two things are real or fake once we try them. When Duque said this, Lothar's eyes lit up astonishingly. Lang even clapped his hands in amazement. Good. If the old king of a country was killed on the battlefield and even his head was cut off, what was the easiest way for the new king to establish his authority? Wasn't it just to kill the old king's enemy and clear his name? It could also boost the morale of the people. The same logic applied to the tribes that were more courageous and valued individual strength more. Antonidas stroked his long white beard. Are we going to hang the chief's head from the start? No. Duque shook his right index finger. That's too wasteful. I'm very confident that Orgrim will attack South Shore. This move is just a safety measure, or it can only be used when forcing the tribe to bleed. Force the tribe to bleed, how ruthless. The kings could already imagine how the tribe would feel when they found out that South Shore was a super tough nut to crack and was about to retreat but had to continue sending troops to deal with this death trap. That wasn't all. Duque drew a line on the map. As long as the tribe can't cross the sea through this shortest route, they'll have to make a big detour no matter if they go west or east. By then, Daylin, your fleet can. If the tribe went around South Shore through the wetlands, it would be hundreds or even thousands of nautical miles no matter which way they went. If Daylin's fleet couldn't even handle the transport ships that wouldn't resist, they might as well sink themselves. Chapter 246. The entire command center echoed with King Daylin's laughter. It was definitely a good sign on the eve of a great war. Everyone knew that the Horde was powerful. The depressed atmosphere in the command center had also spread to the middle-level commanders. The Horde's change of tactics made the Alliance, who already had the upper hand, feel that their morale had dropped by 30% before the war even started. They did not know that the Battle of Hillsbrad on the west coast had indeed happened in history. The Alliance had paid a heavy price for the victory. Ha ha ha. I will let those damn greenskins see what the sea wolves of Kul Tiras are like. The long sea route is enough for my boys to send them all to the bottom of the sea to feed the fish. Daylin Proudmoore laughed happily. He was so happy that he kept patting Duque's shoulder. Yo, Duque, you really don't want to consider my Jaina? She's only 3 years younger than you. She can get married in a few years. Pfft. Duque seemed to have sensed Aurelia's murderous intent. He shrunk his neck. No. Thanks. I won't consider marriage for the time being. Actually. Aurelia did not have much of a reaction. However, when Duque glanced at her guiltily, everyone felt that there was definitely something going on between her and Duque. Aurelia was furious. If they were not in the Alliance Command Center, if Cervantes did not secretly pull her back, the Demon King might have gone crazy. However, at this time, Aurelia could only pretend that nothing had happened. She smiled elegantly and looked out of the window as if there was an opera in the air. Ah! God! You're so blue. Aurelia felt that she was an idiot. It's all that little bastard's fault. Behind Aurelia, the second sister of the Windrunner family covered her mouth and snickered. Okay, gentlemen. Lothar clapped his hands to attract everyone's attention. Thank you, Mr. Marcus, for your brilliant plan. Let's make some changes to the battle plan. Everyone has seen South Shore's defensive line. I don't think we need all of our troops to defend South Shore. We can mobilize a considerable portion of our mobile forces to prevent the Horde from attacking the west coast. The military meeting continued. South of the sea. Half a day later, Chief Orgrim Doomhammer received a shocking piece of news in the main tent of the wetland tribe. The Alliance had fortified the entire coastline. What's the problem? As long as there was enough space to spread out, the weak humans were useless. Great Chief, if you're afraid, you can let me, Red Mafia, play forward. Rend Blackhand, the foolish son of the former Great Chief Blackhand. He and his brother Mame had always believed that Orgrim had killed his father in a despicable manner and then ascended to the position of High Chieftain. Orgrim really wanted to kill these two brats. Unfortunately, Orgrim couldn't do it. After the battle at Stormwind City, the Blackrock tribe had lost too many of their elites. At this time, his son would undoubtedly cause the already weakened Blackrock tribe to split again. Orgrim didn't want to see this happen. This would cause the Blackrock tribe to lose control of the tribe. The wily Orgrim was waiting patiently. Enough. Red. The humans have become more cunning than before. The era of one beast-man warrior fighting 10 human warriors is over. Even if I don't want to admit it, I have to admit that the humans fought very well under the cover of the bunkers. I don't want to waste the lives of the tribe's warriors. Do you want my Warsong tribe to take the lead? Grom Hellscream roared as he walked over with his famous blood howl. Great Chief, do you think those bunkers are fake? At this time, an unwelcome figure appeared. The warlock, Ghoul Dan. Orgrim couldn't hide his disgust. In the end, he didn't kill Ghoul Dan. After clearing out 70% of the Shadow Council's warlocks, Orgrim's soldiers controlled the remaining warlocks and Ghoul, Dan, who had just woken up. If Orgrim didn't need Ghoul, Dan's warlocks to fight against the human mages, if Ghoul, Dan didn't offer up those damned monsters when the tribe needed new soldiers, Orgrim might have really killed Ghoul, Dan. When Ghoul, Dan woke up again, his strength was much weaker. When Medivh died, he let his soul sneak into Medivh's sea of consciousness to steal something. In the end, Duque stabbed Medivh in the chest, causing Ghoul, Dan to suffer. Ghoul, Dan lost half of his soul because of this. After waking up, in order to survive, Ghoul, Dan submitted to Orgrim. No matter how much Orgrim hated Ghoul, Dan for murdering his good friend Durotan, he had to admit that Ghoul, Dan was the only one who could help him in terms of strategy among these tribal leaders whose brains were all muscles. I think it's fake, but I'm not sure. The humans have a way to build a sturdy fortress in a short period of time. I personally went to see it. 3 days ago, there was nothing there. 3 days later, there was a fortress that couldn't be destroyed even with a catapult. It was obvious that Duke's cement had caused Orgrim to misjudge the situation. The power of a transmigrator was evident. Hee hee. Ghoul, Dan laughed evilly, won't we know if we test it out? I can have one of my warlocks follow your scouting ship. Okay. After returning to South Shore, Duque was tricked. On a journey to the furthest point of the west coast, Aurelia seemed to have done something to Duque's horse. Duque's horse seemed to have entered heat, jumping around Aurelia's horse. Duque's bones were about to fall apart. On the way up the hill, Aurelia tricked Duque again. Oh, so it's like that. This is the place where my rangers will be stationed? It didn't sound like a problem, but anyone would have a mental breakdown if they were constantly being whispered into their ears. It was like a ghost. Even though this wasn't surprising at all. After Aurelia's arrival, Duque understood how quickly and quietly Aurelia could appear and disappear. Aurelia would often suddenly speak into Duque's ears when he wasn't aware. It seemed intimate, but it was just to scare him. And it seemed like the Demon King was enjoying it. At first, Gavin Rad tried to stop this. Firstly, Duque didn't let him chase Aurelia away. Secondly, speed wasn't a paladin's forte. Thirdly, he was powerless to stop it. In the end, Gavin Rad obediently became a third wheel. Chapter 247. Standing on a hill at the westernmost point of the western coast and looking south, the huge Atonement Island, the island called Tobalad, was on the right side of the horizon. It was a spiral-shaped island with a huge fortress at the highest point. On the shore of the island, the newly transferred Kurtira's 4th Fleet was stationed there. Duque, are you kidding me? I don't think those green-skinned creatures would be stupid enough to attack here. Aurelia gently placed her hands on her hips. Following the direction of her hands, one could see the sexy mermaid lines of this beautiful ranger. For some reason, Duque suddenly found that he could not look at Aurelia directly recently. Aurelia glared at Duque, reminding him that this was a time of war. Unfortunately, Aurelia also found that she could not look at Duque directly recently. Even if she kept telling herself that Duke was just a 15-year-old kid, she still couldn't believe it. But he did not look like a kid. Alright, back to the main topic. The place they were at was very delicate. From the topography of the mountains, there were towering mountains to the west. Even the beast men would find it extremely difficult to climb up the steep cliffs of almost 90 degrees. This was definitely a nightmare for an army to disembark. The hill they were standing on had a slope of about 45 degrees, all the way to the beach. It could be said that this was the limit for an army to disembark. Aurelia did not think that the horde would probe here, mainly because they were too close to Kurtira's 4th Fleet. Even if the 4th Fleet was weaker and only had half the number of the first 3 fleets, it was still not something that the horde's transport ships or reconnaissance ships could contend against. No. Aurelia, have you noticed that the geographical position here is very delicate? It happens to be within range of the island's cannons. The female elf stroked her gorgeous blonde hair. She noticed that the island was a little far away. If they passed through the side of the island, because of the protruding mountains on the west side, there would be a blind spot that long-range weapons could not reach. If they broke through here, the cannons on the island would not be able to reach them. But here, Duque had actually built a huge bunker. A 5-story blockhouse was built here using cement mixed with newly arrived volcanic limestone. The lowest level had a total of 8 cannons, and the second level had 12 ballistae. There were also catapults on both sides of the blockhouse. This configuration was almost comparable to South Shore. I want you to destroy all the scouts of the tribe in the shortest time possible. I can only leave this task to you, Aurelia. Duque said with bright eyes. The female elf was obviously snubbed. She put her hands on her waist and felt as if there was an invisible tail on her butt. Humph. You seem to know quite well who is the strongest woman in the Windrunner family. Duque facepalmed, sweating profusely. On the way, Duque arranged for Sylvanas to guard a blockhouse midway between South Shore and this place. In Aurelia's opinion, that was the most likely place to be tested. Because of this, Aurelia threw a tantrum for a long time. Now that the great demon king was satisfied, she let him go. Aurelia, who was ready for battle, felt that Duque was a hindrance. She said that he, as the deputy commander, did not need to worry about the specific layout of the battlefield and sent Duque away. Duque had thought that this was the end, but on the way back to South Shore, he saw 2 long legs dangling in the air. The green boots hanging in the air were really eye-catching. Coupled with the long legs that were definitely more than 10 meters long, it was hard not to see them. Elves were slender to begin with, and Queen Sylvanas' long legs were even more exaggerated. Not to mention the extra fat, it was a perfect beauty that would have been too plump if there was more, but too skinny if there was less. Duque, Gavin Rad, Windsor, and Duque's guards stopped their horses. All right, Hill. Sylvanas, what's the matter? Queen Sylvanas' legs swayed as if she was kicking the water, and there was an intoxicating laziness in her expression. Nothing, I just feel that. Are you looking down on me? It seems like you gave me the most likely place to find orc scouting ships, but in fact, you think that my sister's place is the key, right? This intuition, the Windrunner sisters are all monsters. Duque sighed. Yes, I have to admit, in my mind, the probability of that is 5 times higher. Why did you arrange it this way? Queen Sylvanas asked casually. Because you don't look motivated? Duque decided to play dumb. Everyone knows that you are a famous salary thief in Cuel Salis. You get the benefits of a ranger general, but you don't do any proper work. Of course, this was just a facade. The main reason was the suppression of the Silver Moon Council, or rather, the suppression of the High Elves mages on the entire ranger faction. The mages who mastered magic were the rulers, but the rulers also needed more ordinary warriors to maintain the pyramid structure of the ruling class, so they always suppressed the ranger faction. Moreover, the High Elves were originally exiled by the Druid faction, the dominant Night Elves, because they had different opinions on the use of magic. Therefore, the mages had been suppressing the more natural ranger faction for thousands of years. Unable to accept the excellence of the 3 Windrunner sisters, the Silver Moon Council only promoted Sylvanas to the rank of Ranger General because of her undeniable military achievements. But this was the limit. The Silver Moon Council had been making things difficult for Sylvanas and suppressing him in almost every way. If the Hindustani family lost a cat, they would ask her to look for it, but if there was a big incident like an arcane puppet going berserk, she would not be involved. This was for the sake of political balance, and also a compromise. Sylvanas had the title of Town Security of Cuel Salis, the general of the city guards, and could not do anything at all. Oh, don't look down on the women of the Windrunner family. Any one of us 4 sisters has killed 3-digit trolls, Sylvanas complained. Strangely, Duque found that Queen Sylvanas had entered a serious mode. Most of the women of the Windrunner family had a lively and curious side to them. If they ignored their innate desire for battle because of this side of their personality, someone would definitely pay a terrible price. Duque quickly drew a cross on his chest with an invisible hand of the soul, and secretly said, Namo Amitabha and Amitabha Buddha, then put on a face that showed that he valued Queen Sylvanas very much. Oh, I believe so too. Since you have spoken, then fine, I will prepare a special seat for you in Southshore in 3 days. There will be prey that you will be satisfied with, Duque promised. Hee, that's more like it. Sylvanas' figure suddenly disappeared from the big tree trunk. Chapter 248. The next moment, Sylvanas suddenly appeared behind Duque, who was riding on horseback. It looked like the two of them were riding on the same horse, incomparably intimate. In reality, Queen Sylvanas did not put any weight on the horse at all. She was so light that he could not feel any weight at all. Her hands pressed lightly on Duque's shoulders, and she came up from Duque's right back. A strange natural fragrance gently brushed past Duque's ear, making Duque's heart itch. Then, Duque suddenly felt a strange touch on his right cheek. It was the touch of red lips. Unlike Aurelia's soft kiss last time, which was like kissing a child, this kiss felt between intimacy and warning. Between kiss and bite, there was a hint of a reward, but also a faint warning. Yo, the great lad that my sister has taken a fancy to. This is your reward in advance. But if you dare to break your promise, I will bite off a piece of your flesh in the same place. After the lightning kiss, Queen Sylvanas's warning came through the whisper of the wind. Duque touched the right side of his face, not knowing whether to laugh or cry. Was this a warning? Or a reward? In any case, Duque was teased again. Sylvanas's green figure suddenly disappeared without a trace. She was ridiculously fast, and her graceful figure was also dazzling. On the other side, Gavin Rad chuckled unkindly. Hey! You're not qualified as a bodyguard. Duque complained. As long as you give the order to label Lady Aurelia or Lady Sylvanas as an enemy, my warhammer will definitely not hesitate to smash that beautiful face. Gavin Rad's face had a naughty look on it. The subtext was, do you dare, Duque? Duque would not do that even if he was out of his mind. That was Queen Sylvanas. If he could change history and save Queen Sylvanas, so that she would no longer be the cold undead queen, but a warm and lively Sylvanas, that would be perfect. Thinking of King Lang, who was still alive and kicking, Duque suddenly felt confident. However, could Sylvanas still be called Queen She if she did that? Duque suddenly felt a little melancholic. At this moment, Gavin Rad muttered softly, thank goodness you didn't take fourth brother as well. Otherwise, you would have become everyone's enemy. What? Duque was stunned for a moment and didn't pay attention. Oh, nothing. As expected, the tribe's probing came on the second day. It was a dusk raid. Almost 30 transport ships rushed out of the sea almost as night fell. Currently, the Horde was indeed lacking in warships. The clever orcs had found another way to solve the problem of not having control over the sea. That was speed. It was unreasonably fast. It was insanely fast. This wasn't the latest metal lump, but an earlier batch made of pure wood. It was lighter and faster. The hull was ridiculously low. There was no mast, no tower, and no deck could be seen from the outside. The part above the sea was almost completely covered by defensive shells. The orc laborers covered the top of the ship with large shells for defense. What did the orc transport ships use as power? The answer was oiling. It was purely hand-powered, without any additives or preservatives. Oh, wrong, without any high-end navigation technology. There wasn't even a rudder. It relied entirely on paddles to change course. From a bird's-eye view, the entire ship looked like a cockroach gliding on the surface of the water. The orcs' navigation was simple and violent. What if the waves capsized the ship? What if they were not skilled enough to sail on the sea? Nothing. If they sank, so be it. Orcs who could not be used had no right to live. This was the orcs' philosophy of life. When 27 of the 30 transport ships broke away from the patrol fleet and rushed over, there was a huge commotion on Tobalad. It was only when the ships broke through the waves, completely ignoring the possibility of recycling them and rushed to the beach along with the surging tide, that the first meaningless roar of cannons rang out on Tobalad Island. The sky rapidly darkened. Looking from afar, most of the ships had reached the shore. Many black figures gathered together and stepped onto the stony beach. They didn't line up and charged towards the hill in a disorderly manner. Even from the hill, Aurelia could see these creatures with red eyes and green skin. They were tall and had no armor. They carried heavy weapons that could definitely be described as massive as they ran towards the hill. They brandished crude weapons such as axes, hammers, machetes, and spears. Many of them didn't have the glow of metal. And they had a lot of people. It was hard to imagine how more than 50 people could fit on those small transport ships that looked like they could only fit 20 people. 22 ships, more than 1,000 Suicide Squad members. Night attack. This was not a small amount of pressure for the regular human army. The High Elf Rangers were an exception. They didn't even need to observe the direction of the wind. The Windrunner sisters were the children of the wind. Aurelia raised her emerald green longbow and knocked 3 green arrows with her slender fingers. She didn't stop to recite a series of numbers. Wind southwest. Force 2. Elevation 3. Beside Illyria, Lilith's Windrunner, who had been silent all this while, shouted uncharacteristically. Wind southwest. Force 2. Elevation 3. Behind the Windrunner sisters, 500 elite rangers raised their longbows in silence. If it was a human archer unit, they might need a marksman to lead the shots. Everyone would shoot in the same direction. At least the landing point wouldn't be too ridiculous. The human archers played with blanket shooting. They relied on numbers and the density of arrows to kill in an area. What about the High Elf Rangers? Sorry. They were all F*King snipers. Aurelia's strong figure stood in the wind. The breeze blew her golden hair and her green cloak. She looked like a valiant female archer. 3 consecutive shots. Aurelia shouted. The bowstrings in the hands of these elite rangers, who were holding 2 or 3 arrows at the same time, were finally released. More than 1,200 arrows flew into the sky, striving to outdo each other. At the same time, Duque had specially arranged the fake goods to be shot. What the catapult threw out were all arrows without arrowheads or feathers. What Duke wanted was this feeling of being shot from all directions. It was for the beast men in the observation ships to see. The real fatal ones were Aurelia's rangers. It was difficult for bows and arrows to deal a fatal blow to the strong orcs. This rule, that had been proven countless times, clearly only applied to human troops. For the High Elves, who were born with marksmanship and had night vision and telescopic eyes. The exposed throats and skulls of the orcs were simply huge targets. In the second round of 3 consecutive shots, the orcs attacking the beach were actually all wiped out. Chapter 249. Each of the orcs had 2 or 3 elven arrows stuck in their vitals. The most miserable orc had 4 arrows in his throat and 3 arrows in each of his eye sockets. There was almost no place for him to stick them in. Suddenly, there was a burst of mournful cries on the beach. The sound was so dense that it almost made people think that it was just one loud sound. A few seconds later, the beach was filled with the sound of the wind and waves, but there was no sound of people. Only the green shadows of the beach under the last rays of the setting sun, as well as the black sea under the dim light, were chasing the scouting ships. The orcs attacking the beach were completely wiped out. Silence. Dead silence. Not only were the orcs frightened, but the Kurtula's navy on the island were also dumbfounded. The navy had originally planned to approach the shore as much as possible and support the defenders on the shore with artillery fire. The rear admiral was prepared to accept the severe punishment of King Delin as the price for his defense line being broken under his eyes. But what happened? The orcs attacking the beach were killed in seconds. Just as the Navy ships were unmoored and ready to go out to sea, they were all dead. What the hell was that? But that was not important. Even if the orcs on the shore were killed, there were still those on the sea. Looking at the orc scouting ships that turned around and wanted to leave, the Kurtula's Fourth Fleet chased them with all their might. Duke, who was watching the battle from the shore, was worried that the beast men would be as pitiful as the orcs. They would be completely wiped out without even a messenger. In the end, when he saw that 2 scouting ships had escaped, Duque finally let out a long sigh of relief. Humph. Little rascal, are you satisfied now? On the top floor of the bunker, Aurelia carried her bow and looked at the relieved Duque with her hands on her hips. I'm satisfied, what about you? Duque asked casually. Humph. It's not even a warm-up. Us Windrunner family rangers, without the arm strength to shoot 100 arrows, are not qualified at all. Duque was dumbfounded. Are all the high elves monsters? Drawing a bow and pulling an arrow looked easy. To shoot far, one had to use a strong bow. In the truest sense, a strong bow could not be drawn without a draw force of over 100 Gen. Even though the arrows could fly further with the help of the mountain, the Elven Ranger's sniping range was more than 100 meters. At this distance, if a professional human archer were to use a bow of this level, they would only be able to draw the bow 10 times at most before their arms would become sore and swollen. Aurelia actually said 100 arrows. Looking at those arms and legs that were more slender than a human's, it was hard to imagine that the muscles under the fair skin had such endurance. However, on Aurelia's smooth arm, there wasn't even a mouse muscle. It was completely streamlined. Duque shrugged. Alright, I'm convinced. Seeing that there were no outsiders around, Aurelia came up to Duque and affectionately put her hand on his shoulder. Hey, I heard from my sister last night that you gave her a special class seat. Big sister went to jail for 3 months because of you. You can't be so biased, right? When Duque heard this, he was speechless. It was strange for 2 sisters to compete over this kind of thing. Aurelia went to jail for him for 3 months. This was definitely a big favor. Duque had been in Azeroth for a long time. Other than this, he really didn't feel that he owed anyone a big favor. Aurelia was the only one. Alright, after the grudge in her heart was resolved, Aurelia didn't care about it anymore. In the end, such a big favor was casually used by Aurelia to ask for repayment. And it was this kind of unseemly repayment. Duque was so angry at Aurelia that he laughed and cried. Yes, he laughed and cried at the same time. Alright, actually, I built a very sturdy hill behind the mayor's house in South Shore. There is a bunker on top of it. Yes, I know that little brother is good to me. Come, let big sister give you a kiss. Kiss where? Of course, on the forehead. Could it be anywhere else? But this time, there were no outsiders. Duque was able to enjoy the deep ravine between the 2 meat mountains. Shamefully, Duque's mind was shaken. At the same time, the middle bunker that Servanas was guarding was also being probed by the orcs. Their position was a little off from what was planned. It was unknown whether it was because of the tides or the current. Servanas led the rangers and sprinted for half a kilometer before they finally caught up with the orcs and attacked them head-on. It was also an instant kill. Unfortunately, there were only 2 boats that landed. Queen Servanas was not satisfied at all. Late at night the next day, Orgrim received a report from the returning scout ship. What? The humans have set up a large number of cannons, ballistae and archers along the coast. Orgrim could not believe his ears. Orgrim did not give up and asked every scout in detail. Great Chief, it's true. I swear on the clan's flag. Less than 100 men away, and we were shot by many arrows. There were about 40 to 50 bundles. The orc scout's words were the orc version. It was about 300 meters long, and we were shot by 5,000 arrows. Where did the humans get so many archers? If it was true, then the human kingdoms in the northern continent were much stronger than those in the southern continent. In reality, the information that they received showed that there were 6 human kingdoms in the northern continent. Orgrim felt terrible. If they gave up on the Hillsbrad foothills, then the horde would have to go around the long sea route without any advantage in the sea. This was suicide. But the horde could not wait. After the main force left Stormwind, the horde realized that most of the southern continent did not have enough food to support the army. The dwarves' Asmodean kingdom was cold, and many plants in the wetlands were inedible. Large numbers of crocodiles and ferocious monsters caused a lot of trouble for the horde. Only the rich northern continent could provide them with hope. Orgrim hated Ghoul, Dan and the other warlocks. Under his instigation, the horde was like a swarm of locusts. No matter where they went, they quickly used up all the resources. All the trees were cut down, and the grass was uprooted. They either used it for themselves, or burned it for fun. This was not a joke. The orcs could not suppress the urge to destroy in their hearts. When there were no enemies, the orcs found it fun to destroy the environment. Without the pressure from the human mages, Orgrim might have really killed all those damned warlocks. But now, Orgrim could do nothing. The horde was like a wheel rolling down a mountain. It would either continue to roll, or it would flip over and be destroyed halfway up the mountain. There was no way to stop. Orgrim bared his teeth and pressed his thick reddish-brown finger on the coarse cowhide map. Since the humans have defenses all along, then let's pick the best place to land. His finger was pointing at the location of South Shore. Chapter 250. On the 18th of November, the famous Battle of South Shore, officially known as the Battle of Hillsbrad Hills, broke out. Unlike the previous battles between humans and orcs, where they lost in the field and were forced to defend passively in every large-scale defensive battle, this time, they successfully lured the enemy into the trap and entered the carefully selected battlefield of South Shore. Every Alliance general was extraordinarily excited. The intelligence had come back. The Horde army had assembled on the ships, and according to the direction, their destination was South Shore. There was no way to lie about this. Duquesne's Naga could not possibly guard the coastline of hundreds of kilometers of wetlands without any loopholes. This was something that could not be guarded by any means in this era. The march of the army was different. When a large number of ships were pushed from the beach into the sea, the Alliance generals knew that the war was coming. One day later, the orcs would come. Duque pressed his palm on the huge map in the command center and said loudly, "This time, the name of the battle is Orc Blood." Orc Blood. A simple and straightforward name. The proud soldiers and generals from the 7 kingdoms all fell into a murmur as if they were possessed. Soon, an indescribable feeling of fear spread through their bodies and went straight to the deepest part of their minds. It shook violently, resonating with the armor on their bodies and the long swords in the scabbards at their waists. These experienced generals had a strange feeling at the same time. It was as if a magnificent illusion had appeared in front of their eyes. On the battlefield that had been burned to ashes, countless green-skinned corpses were strewn all over the place. Every corpse was so ferocious and cruel, but their unwilling souls could only continue to vent their anger by roaring in the desperate hell. The generals could not think of any other name more suitable for this battle after hearing the name, Orc Blood, from Duquesne's mouth. Even if this was not the final battle between the Alliance and the Horde, it was still very exciting to let the enemy's blood dry. No. They even felt that because of the name, the success of the battle was inevitable. Of course, this was just a momentary illusion. Not to mention the Stormwind Kingdom's army that had experienced the defense battle of Stormwind City, just by seeing with their own eyes that even the corpses of the orc laborers had the physiques of the strongest human soldiers, the generals of the Alliance knew that the road ahead would be extremely difficult. There was no such thing as a casual victory. Every victory, even with such an overwhelming advantage, had to go through several life and death ordeals. The expressions on their faces quickly changed from excitement to seriousness. However, it was undeniable that as useless martial artists in a peaceful era, hearing such a name for battle in a chaotic world that suddenly descended upon them would inevitably stir up the lofty sentiments lurking in their bodies. Their sharp eyes were still filled with excitement. What excited them the most was to take the first step towards strategic victory before they gained an advantage in terms of tactics. This was the great achievement of a super genius deputy commander who looked like he was 19 years old but was actually only 15 years old. In a sense, they were standing on the shoulders of giants. Please let me, Hasa's Eagle Knights, be the vanguard. Stop joking. This is a defensive battle. Don't tell me your knights are going to charge into the sea. Let my torrential Fort Mountain infantry do it. Every general enthusiastically recommended themselves to Duque. Originally, the deployment of the army should have been done by Lothar, the commander-in-chief. Lothar, on the other hand, said that no one knew the South Shore defense line better than Duke himself, so it was best for him to arrange it. So he temporarily handed over the command of the army to Duke. Duque was not going to pass on this responsibility. He was very clear that this was likely to be the turning point between the alliance and the horde. Every army that appeared might go down in history because of this. However, Duque was extremely cautious. As a transmigrator, he knew that the horde must have some cards. Even though the horde had changed a lot, the few cards in the history were probably still there. First, General Proudmoore. Duque directly called out his rank. Yes. It was rare for King Dalen Proudmoore to stand at attention. Except for the 4th Fleet, which is cruising in the waters opposite the West Beach, all fleets set up pocket formations in the waters opposite South Shore. All light transport ships are to be sent over. Before we receive the signal, we must let go of 60% of the large transport ships with metal plates. Once we receive the signal, kill them at all costs. No problem. General Dalen was heroic. Duque turned his head and scanned the alliance generals from left to right. Finally, his gaze landed on Mograine and Abendis. General Mograine, General Abendis, can I trust your Scarlet Crusade? The Scarlet Crusade will not retreat. Mograine roared domineeringly. On this obviously much younger face, Duque seemed to see the heroic image of him wielding the domineering semi-divine weapon, Ashbringer, to kill enemies in the future. Duque drew a line on the map. From the mountain to the west of South Shore, 5 kilometers to the west belongs to your army. I want you to defend the mountain to the death. Without the signal, no counterattack. Understood. In this era, army was a very general concept. A smaller army could only have 5 or 6,000 people. A bigger army, like Mograine's Scarlet Crusade, had nearly 30,000 people. The current Scarlet Crusade was far less crazy and twisted than in the future. They had excellent discipline and high morale. They were definitely the cream of the Lordaeron army. Duque sent them as the main defense force. King Terinas, who had been silent all this time, also had a proud expression on his face. Next, Duque looked at King Lang. General Rin. Duque was definitely strange, but in order to maintain the military system of the alliance, he had to do this. Yes. The golden-armored Lang was also eager to prove himself. You and General Seamus will lead the Griffin Legion and the 1st and 2nd Stormwind Infantry Divisions to defend the mountain to the east of the town. Understood. To be honest, Lang was a little disappointed. It sounded like Mograine, but one on the left and one on the right of South Shore. In reality, the Stormwind had the advantage in terms of terrain. There was also a relatively rapid river to the east of South Shore. If they attacked from the mountain, it would be no different than having an extra moat. Lang also knew that Duque wanted him to attack, but also to preserve the strength of the Stormwind. Considering the overall situation, this was the safest arrangement. Lang did not say anything. General Lothar, lead all the cavalry and prepare to charge along the designated route. When the time comes, all the enemies that enter the town will be thrown into the sea to feed the fish. No problem. Lothar was also very excited. Chapter 251. The sun was setting. A bright sword was inserted into the hilltop. In the field of vision. The tip of the sword was stabbed into the slightly yellowed meadow. The sharp blade, which shone like a pool of autumn water, reflected the vast sea, while the hilt of the sword blended into the endless sky. It was as if the sword had pierced through the entire world. The blue ribbon on the hilt with the emblem of a lion's head fluttered in the breeze, and the swaying elegance reminded one of a distant memory. The wise and deep blue eyes were squinting slightly, greedily absorbing the scenery between heaven and earth into his pupils. The middle-aged man was wearing a blue lion's head cloak with golden edges. Under the cloak was a shiny golden helmet, which symbolized the glory of an era, as well as the shame of an era. A pair of large hands that had only recently become rough touched the top of the sword hilt, holding the sharp sword. He stood upright in the wind like a stone statue. "Your Majesty, it's getting late." "Andoin, guess what I'm looking at?" King Lang smiled and turned around to ask his childhood friend, the former leader of the Storm Knights, and the current commander-in-chief of the Alliance. "After crossing this sea, head forward, then southwest, then southeast, where Stormwind City is." Lothar was indeed worthy of being Lang's best friend. He easily guessed Lang's thoughts. Stormwind City is the land that we once risked our lives to protect. It's also our glory. When I knew that Stormwind City could not be defended, I thought that my sword and I would be destroyed there. However, for the sake of Varian, I'm still standing here, looking at my sword in a foreign land. Lang pulled the sword out of the ground. The sharp and tough blade did not show the slightest bit of damage even though it had been through such rough treatment. Lang raised the tip of the sword to the sky and stared at it quietly. A timid voice came from behind Lang and Lothar. "Father, are you saying that I've tarnished your glory?" "No, it's not like that, Varian. True glory is never a person, or a person's private property." Lang retracted his gaze. The storm golden sword that symbolized royal power and glory looked extremely slender and sturdy in the setting sun. It was as if the sword was supporting a part of the world. Lang sheathed the sword and walked over to his lover and child. The queen gave Varian a gentle push, allowing the young Varian to step forward. Lang caressed Varian's head lovingly. His loving gaze seemed to have traveled through time. 1,000 years ago, when the last son of Thoradin the Great was abandoned in the ruins of the Torrent Castle by the arrogant nobles who were eager to go to the rich land of Lordaeron. The late king of Stormwind brought his son and led the abandoned poor people across half of the continent to the valley where Stormwind City is now. The late king made a vow, "I swear to protect my people, to keep them away from hunger and cold, to keep them away from killing and strife, and to keep them away from the arrogance and greed of the nobles." Lang's voice was deep, but there was a strange sense of emptiness that made everyone feel as if they had traveled through time with his voice. The late king did it. He forged the glory of Stormwind in his own way. He also used his own way to tell the later generations what glory was. Before he died, he also issued an imperial order for every noble in the new kingdom to follow the spirit of chivalry, to be humble and devout, full of glory, not afraid of sacrifice, brave and resolute, compassionate and honest. That was how Stormwind came to be founded, with military might and the tradition of inheriting titles through military merit. It's a pity that most of the nobles in Stormwind have forgotten all of this. Hence, I'm more willing to see the fall of Stormwind City as a punishment from our ancestors for losing our glory. The young William nodded as if he understood. Fortunately, when the people of Stormwind were at their most desperate, I still had your uncle Andoin and the unparalleled genius Duque to help me. This gave me the opportunity to make up for my mistake and recover the lost glory of the kingdom. My personal glory is no longer important. My only hope is that the descendants of Orion will not forget their original intention and pass on the glory of the late king. As long as I can do it, I won't have any regrets even if I die. Father. You will. You will see the day when Stormwind City is restored, William said with absolute certainty. I hope so too. However, your Uncle Duque and I will eventually grow old. When that time comes, it will depend on your and Brother Duque's hard work. Yes. The young prince nodded vigorously. Looking at the sea, Lang's vision seemed to penetrate the horizon and reach the huge transport fleet that was traveling at high speed on the sea. It all depends on tomorrow. Don't worry, there's you, there's me, there's Duque. Whether it's Stormwind City or the Alliance, we are invincible. No one would have thought that just a day ago, at the wetland, at the gathering of hundreds of thousands of orcs, someone would say something that was almost the same. Orgrim Doomhammer stood on a high hill. In his vision, hundreds of thousands of orcs stepped on the muddy ground. There were so many beast men that it looked like a bright green ocean as far as the eye could see. This ocean breathed together, enjoyed the victory together, and enjoyed the same fate. Every orc was looking forward to Orgrim's speech. In the eyes of the orcs, even though there was still the last iron furnace fort that had not been conquered, everyone believed that it was only a matter of time before Kilrog Deadeye's Bloodring clan dragged those damned dwarves out of the cave and killed them. They had completely conquered this continent. Although there was better prey and more fertile land here than in their homeland, it was still far from enough to accommodate all the clans. In the eyes of the orcs, this was only enough for 3 large clans to thrive. But how could there only be 3 large clans? Orgrim laughed. Then, he raised his famous, Doomhammer, up high and roared towards the sky. My people! Listen to me! The commotion below disappeared. Every orc quietened down and turned their ugly faces full of protruding fangs towards Orgrim. This world is very suitable for survival. We can rebuild our homeland here. And we have already conquered this land. This is the victory of the Horde. This is the victory of the orcs. Suddenly, a burst of earth-shattering cheers erupted from below. Orgrim could only wait for the cheers to die down before he continued. But, this is not enough. Humans are not as weak as we thought. They are very good at learning and have many tricks up their sleeves. Every time they lose, they will become stronger to deal with our axes and hammers. Even though we have chased them out of this continent, they are still trying very hard to take back what once belonged to them. So, what we need to do is to destroy them. To wipe them out from this world. Orgrim raised his warhammer and pointed it towards the north. Orcs, north, attack. Chapter 252. Orgrim's speech was simple and violent. Needless to say, there would naturally be people who would describe the richness of the continent in the north. All he needed to do was tell his tribesmen where the enemy was, and his tribesmen, who had become extremely violent after drinking the demon's blood, would swarm towards them. Unlike most beast men, Orgrim was extremely calm and clear-headed. Not only did he carefully study the map and confirm the situation in the nearby seas, he had also started to learn the human common language after leaving Stormwind City. Orgrim purposely kept a family of captives and used their relatives as a hostage to force an old woman to teach him the common language. From pointing to the simplest items, such as a rock, Orgrim compared the pronunciation and verified his translation results one by one. This was very boring and not understood by most beast men. However, in this crossing of the sea, Orgrim produced the corresponding results. He had seen the route of the transport fleet on a captured military map. He was very clear about the power of the huge human warships on the sea. The rumbling of the cannons could easily send more than 10 beast men flying at the same time. The beast men did not have the slightest ability to fight back on the sea. Therefore, Orgrim's chosen route was to start from Paladin Bay on the other side of the wetlands and head northeast to reach the shallow waters with quite a lot of underwater reefs. Then, he would follow the sea between Rapids Fort and Tangarock and head north all the way to the eastern beach next to South Shore. This way, he could allow the main force to avoid the most powerful human fleet on the sea. Orgrim considered the Murlocs and Nagas who worked for the humans, but he felt that there were too few of them to be a threat to the Horde. He did not intend to allow the main force to land on the eastern beach because the mountains there were more steep and the entire beach was covered by the humans' arrows and ballistae. If they landed there, even a victory would be a Pyrrhic one. The western coast of South Shore was different. There were more rocks on the coast, which was convenient for concealment and cover. There were too few people with brains in the Horde. Orgrim could only personally calculate the time of departure and arrival. His calculations were very accurate. If there were no accidents along the way, then the first batch of transport ships would arrive late at night. After the decoy fleet, the main force would land around 4:30 in the morning. As long as the main force could successfully land. When the main force of the horde reached South Shore, it would just be morning. The warriors of the tribe would have a whole day to deal with the humans. Orgrim believed that with the beastmen's unparalleled stamina and endurance, even if the weaker humans could defend themselves for a while, they would be worn down and destroyed after a few hours. Orgrim firmly believed that. In fact, on the Alliance's side, General Dalen, who had already led his fleet out to sea, slammed the table and cursed when he heard the time it would take for the horde to pass the sniper position. "Doesn't this make our entire fleet into mascots at sea?" Dai-Lin felt irritated as he looked at the dark sea through the monocular. The orc leader is obviously not a brute who only knows how to charge. "You've met your match, Dai-Lin." It was a beautiful lady with long blonde hair and long pointy ears. She stood beside Dai-Lin. This was a position that was closer to Dai-Lin than the guards of the royal family. All of these indicated that this elven mage had a special status. Indeed, this high elf mage's name was Gina Goldsword, and she was King Delen's lover. This was an almost open secret. "Is there any news?" "Yes, your favorite little Duque sent a message. He said that the plan remains the same." Dai-Lin suddenly calmed down. He was very sure that Duque had a special way to change the situation. In this era, unless the ships were less than 100 meters apart, there was no such thing as a night battle. Since Duque told him that the plan remained the same, he would wait for that opportunity. It was late at night, and the moon was shrouded in dark clouds. Looking out over the dark sea was a very boring task. Many new lookouts would fall asleep in such a situation. But no one could sleep tonight. All the Marines were told that they would be engaged in an unprecedented night battle. This determined that the powerful Kur Dyla's fleet would either gain nothing from this battle and be left to the side, or they would be promoted to become hunters of the night. The huge fleet was arranged in a straight line parallel to the distant coastline. This was the best choice for maximizing the fleet's firepower against an opponent who could not fight back. The helmsman stared at the stern lights of friendly ships not far ahead, carefully maintaining a distance and formation. In the distant darkness, the first reflection appeared. This quickly attracted the attention of the lookout and Admiral Dai-Lin. Then, more blurry light spots appeared in the darkness. Like slowly rising fireworks, milky white light balls floated high into the sky. In just a few seconds, the surface of the sea lit up even more brightly, illuminating a large part of the coastal area near the coast as if it was daytime. Light spell. Why is it there? Dai-Lin was not a mage, so he was not too sure. The high elf mage, Gina, laughed. If a human or high elf mage apprentice made such a substandard spell, he would definitely be severely punished by his mentor. But for a murloc, this is already very good. Murloc. It's actually a murloc mage. As someone who had spent a long time at sea and dealt with murlocs, nagas, and various sea monsters for half his life, Dai-Lin certainly knew that there was a branch of murloc wise men among the murlocs. However, those ridiculous murloc wise men were the worst spellcasters. The ice arrows they shot could only form ice that was less than a finger's width in an area the size of a palm. They would scatter with a single slap. Unless they hit a vital point, there was no lethality to speak of. Dai-Lin never thought that these murloc wise men, who could only cast level 1 spells at most, could be used in this way. Yes. They were weak scum. But after playing the role of a lighthouse, they were god-level teammates. In the binoculars, he saw that the orc transport ships in the area covered by the light were the target ships covered by iron sheets. Dai-Lin shouted excitedly, "Open all cannons! Open fire! Open fire!" 2 minutes later, the Ku El Dyla's fleet, which was already ready, let out a series of roars. Bang! 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 The so-called salvo was just an extremely short interval between all the cannons from the bow to the stern. If they fired at the same time, the terrifying recoil would destroy the entire deck and even the entire battleship. Even if the cannonballs did not arrive at the same time, the momentum was already very terrifying. A heavy rain of iron bullets streaked across the pitch-black sky and fell into the Horde's transport fleet with a unique screech that symbolized the arrival of the Grim Reaper. Chapter 253. In this era, the accuracy of a fleet's cannons was metaphysical. Not to mention that it was a night battle. These early breech-loading cannons were crude and had no way to improve the stability of the cannons. Yes, there was no rifling, no crosshairs, not even a stable firing base. Every shot would be affected by the recoil from the next shot, causing the ship to tilt. There were no recoil mechanisms or recoil mechanisms. After a shot, the wheels under the cannon retreated to reduce the recoil. Then, the cannons would be pushed back to their original positions. Even the best cannoneers had a worrisome hit rate. Not to mention the Orcs' strange transport ships. They had no sails or decks. They were just a big turtle shell. This gave Dai Lin a headache. Hinged shells that could destroy the ship's masts and grapeshot shells that could kill the ship's crew could not be used. They could only rely on the most primitive cannons to shoot big iron balls to see if they could hit the enemy's vital parts and cause fatal damage. Dai Lin saw through his binoculars that a few cannons hit the enemy ships, but nothing happened. They either bounced off the ship's thick iron sheet or got stuck on the ship's roof. The Orc laborers still rowed the oars with all their might, driving the ship quickly. Damn it! At this rate, I won't even be able to save 10%, let alone 60%. The cannons were fierce, and the water pillars were high. However, only a few Orc transport ships were sunk. Admiral Dai Lin's balls hurt. At this time, the Nagas made their move. Many male Nagas jumped onto the water despite the fierce cannons. They brandished their huge tridents and fiercely hacked at the exposed oars. Often, after a single leap, more than 10 oars were cut off with a series of clattering sounds. The Orc laborers in charge of rowing the ships did not know what was happening. They could see that the ships were already spinning, and the laborers were still rowing the oars so that the broken oars were slicing through the air. Good. Good job. Admiral Dai Lin waved his arms excitedly. Send out the signal. Have the Third Fleet spread out and attack them at close range. The High Elf Mage frowned. Be careful of their counterattack. What are you afraid of? How could a transport ship with such a low railing and no turrets be able to launch a melee battle against our ship? Why should I be afraid of a transport ship that doesn't even have a ram? Dai Lin waved his hands nonchalantly. Thus, the Third Fleet approached. As the distance closed, the power and accuracy of the bombardment increased exponentially. The iron ball cannonball launched by the powerful momentum collided violently with the Orc transport ship. The iron cannonball shattered under the tremendous impact, and so did the transport ship. At this time, the moon suddenly emerged from the clouds. Under the bright moonlight, one could clearly see the metal pieces and wood shavings flying in the air from the explosion. The dazzling light produced by the explosion announced the arrival of death. The cannonballs aimed at the ship's waterline were the most dangerous and brutal. Even if it didn't hit the target directly, a misfire near the ship's waterline would very likely cause the hull of the Orc's inferior transport ship to crack. One after another, the huge metal transport ships began to sink. From the clamor that reached the sky, one could tell that every metal transport ship was filled with Orc warriors. Perhaps on land, these warriors were omnipotent warriors who could charge forward bravely even after taking a dozen arrows. But in the sea, they were nothing. They were no different from weak babies. When the hull tilted, most of the entrances and exits could not be opened. The deck was originally covered with iron to increase the ship's defensive capabilities. This greatly increased the survivability of the people inside when the ship was not sinking. However, when the ship sank, it became a huge coffin. He led nearly 1,000 Orc warriors and slowly sank to the bottom of the shallow sea. Ha ha ha. Ha 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 ha. You want to play naval warfare with our Kultiras? You bunch of green-skinned creatures are not qualified. Dai Lin laughed heartily. He even pulled Gina Goldsword over and gave her a kiss. In his field of vision, at least a dozen giant iron orc transport ships began to sink. More than 30 transport ships had lost their motor power because their oars had been broken, and were floating or spinning on the surface of the sea. I've reported the situation to the Deputy Commander. The Deputy Commander has urgently informed Your Majesty that your fleet needs to retreat. Beware of the Horde's desperate attacks. Beware of what? Beware of these transport ships with low sides, no towers, no ram, and no long-range weapons. Isn't he underestimating our Kultira's fleet? Dai Lin suddenly thought of something. He wants his storm fleet to get some military merits too, right? I'll let them do it later. At this moment, it was as if the heavens wanted to slap him in the face. Dai Lin had successfully demonstrated what it meant by extreme joy turning to sorrow. Thousands of small and medium-sized transport ships suddenly rushed out where there was no light from flash. The biggest difference between these ships and the previous transport ships was that the bow of these ships was equipped with the sharp horn of some kind of huge creature. It was not a standard ram, but it was not much different if it was used for one-time use. General Dai Lin's face instantly turned pale. Retreat. Let the Third Fleet retreat. Dai Lin ordered in a panic. But it was too late. Even though the moonlight was good, when they discovered the swarm of small ships, Kultira's fleet could not do anything. Compared to the light boats that used oars, the sails of Kultira's were too slow in both turning and in speed. The result of their clumsiness was that the ships at the front were all surrounded by the Horde's small ships. The Horde's small transport ships crashed into Kultira's fleet. Then, a scene that left the people of Kultira's dumbfounded happened. The roofs of the transport ships were lifted off. They were not opened like loose leaf, but like a piece of cloth covering them. A bunch of orcs used brute force to flip the roofs that weighed who knew how many tons into the water. Then, without even using grappling hooks, they climbed up the ship's outer wall and onto the deck. Of course, their climbing was resisted by the sailors. Most of the orcs were blasted into the sea before they could climb up. Those that did not know how to swim would often drown. However, as more and more orc transport ships participated in the siege, General Dai Lin, who was a few hundred meters away, watched in shock as the warships of the Third Fleet were attacked one after another. Usually, a warship would be attacked by more than 10 small orc boats. When more than 10 bright green figures appeared on the deck, Dai Lin knew that the ship was finished. Retreat! Retreat quickly! Dai Lin closed his eyes. After painfully abandoning the Third Fleet that was mired in a chaotic battle, Dai Lin led the remaining ships and seriously depleted the tribe's forces with a mid-range bombardment that was very artistic and had a sense of distance. The Horde's fleet had achieved their goal. Under the heavy bombardment, they continued to sail towards South Shore. Chapter 254. South Shore was a small port town. Its size could not compare to any other port on the continent. Needless to say, Booty Bay or the deep-water harbors of the future, such as Storm Port and Menethil Port. However, with Duque's help, it became the busiest port in the entire northern continent after the refugees arrived at Stormwind City. At first, there was only a small wooden pier, but now there was a huge stone pier. It was no longer a place for civilian fishing boats, but a port for both commercial and military purposes. South Shore went from dark at night to a place where it was unsuitable to go out to sea unless there was a storm. Every day, from dawn until the moon rose above the sea, there was no rest. Merchants shipped goods from various ports, not just from the northern continent. Under the temptation of money, the goblins of Booty Bay risked their lives to deliver the goods that Duke ordered from them. Tens of thousands of people worked day in and day out, not to accumulate wealth for this port, but for the survival of the hundreds of thousands of refugees, as well as for the upcoming battle. Late at night, there was still an hour before the first rays of dawn appeared. The sea on the other side of South Shore was calm and tranquil, and there were only sparkling waves on the pitch-black surface of the sea. If the officers had not started the pre-battle mobilization, if the soldiers had not gone to bed early, been woken up early, put on their armor, and waited in the bunkers and trenches on the mountain, everyone would have thought that the battle that was about to happen was just an illusion that would never come. South Shore's command center was brightly lit. Most of the kings were not used to waking up in the middle of the night. For the older kings, Xian, Tarinas, and Eden, the impact was even more obvious. Most of them served refreshment drinks at hand. Duque sat on the seat that originally belonged to Lothar. He was the commander of this battle. Duque gently held his chin with his left hand, and spat out 2 words through gritted teeth: "Ring the bell." Windsor was a very responsible soldier, and he would not miss Duque's order. He waved his hand and shouted, "The enemy is here. Enter the first phase." The clear and sharp bell rang next to the command center. Soon, the bell rang quickly, and more bell rings echoed around the entire South Shore like echoes. The 2 hills on the east and west sides of South Shore were in an uproar. It was as if the hills were the legendary guardians of the shadow elves, the mountain giants. The faint shouts of officers could be heard in the wind. They seemed to be scolding the soldiers who dared to doze off. Flare! Duque was a man of few words. The order was quickly passed down, and soon, a cannon sounded from the eastern hill of South Shore. A dazzling red ball of light was shot into the air. It was only then that the leaders of the alliance who were holding binoculars saw that countless small black shadows had appeared on the surface of the dark sea in the distance. It was much smaller than the warships they were used to seeing at the South Shore port. Compared to them, these small transport ships were like a bunch of leaves scattered on the water. However, these shadows that resembled leaves rapidly grew larger in everyone's field of vision. In just a moment, the shape of a ship appeared in their field of vision. The mages on the 2 sides of the hills released a large number of illumination spells. Countless white balls of light began to rise tens of meters above the beach, illuminating the entire beach as if it was daytime. The Horde's transport ships came. They did not slow down at all and crashed straight into the rocky eastern coast. Even though they were thousands of meters away, the kings in the command center could see a terrifying tremor from the hull of the ship. In their trance, they could even feel the wooden bottom of the boat wailing, and the big iron nails on the deck struggling, making a sound that made their teeth ache as they escaped from the wood. Countless black shadows emerged from the ship. With the help of the light, the human guards on the shore quickly saw their enemies, the orc laborers. They did not wear armor and held the crudest mallets or primitive stone axes. Under the shouts of the few orc warriors, they somewhat foolishly charged towards the hills not far from the shore. First archer team, fire at will. Second archer team, get ready. It was not worth it to use up the physical strength of the archers to deal with the enemy's cannon fodder. However, High Lord Mograine of Rotterdam knew that the main characters today would not be the archers of Rotterdam. And according to the unparalleled deputy commander, after the archers used up their physical strength, there would be at least 3 hours for them to rest and recover. Just as Mograine glanced at the special seat on the top of the hill, the sound of bowstrings vibrating could be heard. The arrows were very accurate. Even if they could not hit the enemy's vital points, they would basically hit the enemy's body. Huh. Not bad. Cervanus, who was bored to death in the special seats, commented. The not bad that Queen Sylvanas mentioned was almost at the level of a sharpshooter in the human world. The shooting skills of the archers of the Rotterdam Kingdom were all accumulated through countless times of shooting practice. They had started training at the age of 18, and most of these archers had more than 5 years of training. The arrows that each of them had used up would probably be worth hundreds of Arather gold coins. After coming here, Mograine had been depressed for a long time when he found out that the arrows of ordinary archers were useless against the orc warriors. The more lethal javelins were the way to go. Luckily, Duque had informed him that the archers could still be used on the enemy's cannon fodder, regardless of whether this was recycling. At least the gold coins were used on the orc laborers. After a dozen breaths, the beach regained its peace. The laborers, who only had loud voices, were quickly shot by many arrows and died on the shore. More and more transport ships came ashore. The archers started to get busy. Their arms were sore from shooting continuously. Finally, the first batch of laborers started to fight their way to the front of the hill. General Abendis shouted, "Raise your spears, raise your shields, attack." In front of the bunker at the bottom of the hill, the soldiers were already ready. They formed a long line of defense. Perhaps this was not enough to defend against the huge number of orc warriors. However, if it was used to deal with the laborers, it would be more than enough to let the new soldiers see some blood. Now, they waited and formed a sturdy shield wall with spears sticking out. There was no strategy to speak of. The scattered orc laborers who were attacking fiercely crashed into the shield wall. The shield wall was not damaged at all. Every laborer was stabbed to death. Chapter 255. The battle with the laborers was easy. Apart from the real blood, it was no different from using spears to stab scarecrows in training. Some soldiers were already teasing, "If the so-called warriors of the Horde are all like this, our team can kill 10,000 of them." Just then, after the second round of illumination, Abendis discovered that a huge transport ship had begun to rush ashore, and many taller figures with obvious armor appeared on the shore. The main force of the orcs was coming. Mograine ordered, "Blow the horn. Archers, cover. Let the soldiers with swords and shields and spears come back. We're about to enter the second phase." The unique horn of the Rotterdam army sounded, and the soldiers who were having fun killing at the front lines suddenly realized that it was time to retreat. Under the good light and the commander's orders, the soldiers retreated in an orderly manner. They followed the predetermined mountain path to the second line of defense that was higher above sea level. When he saw his soldiers retreating according to plan, General Abendis raised his sword and shouted, "First Javelin Brigade, shoot!" The long shadow immediately shot into the air, drawing a beautiful arc in the air. Then, it let out a sharp whistle and pierced downwards. Without any accidents, a considerable number of orc warriors were nailed to death at the bottom of the hill. However, many continued to charge. Abendis noticed that many orc warriors were better armed than what the intelligence had said. They were no longer the naked men described by the soldiers of Storm City, who only had brute strength. Their right shoulders, which held weapons, were covered with huge spiked pauldrons. Their heads were covered with horned helmets, and their chests were covered with a half-body armor that glowed with a metallic luster. Both of their forearms were covered with leather armors. They did not have armor on their lower bodies, only a belt that looked like a leather skirt. However, they were obviously wearing a pair of huge boots, which allowed them to pass through the complicated terrain of the battlefield better. Abendis quickly summoned a Dalajan mage who was in charge of communication, and summarized the information to Duque. After receiving the news, there was silence in the command center. Noxus pursed his lips. "Gentlemen, at least we have confirmed that our enemies are a group of intelligent creatures that can evolve." No one laughed at this lame joke. It was not funny at all. Duque glanced at the exquisite wall clock hanging in the command center. It was 4:30 in the morning. "Tell Aurelia and Cervantes that it's their ranger's turn." Before Duque could finish his sentence, two voices echoed throughout the command center. "I heard you." It was the voice of Great Demon Queen Aurelia. "I'm going to go moldy, Queen," she complained. Then, the earth-shattering noise on the beach seemed to quiet down a lot. Whether it was Lang and Seamus on the eastern hill or Mograine and Abendis on the western hill, none of the commanders dared to believe their eyes. It had been too long since the humans had seen the elite High Elves Rangers. If the definition of a godly archer was to be able to kill one enemy with one arrow, then these Rangers were super godly archers. They were simply monster-level existences. They could only hear the continuous twangs of bowstrings coming from higher up the hill. In just a few breaths, the densely packed tribes on the beach were all shot dead. The arrows were as accurate as if they had eyes, automatically navigating to the throats and other vital points of the orcs. In an instant, the entire beach was empty. "Oh my God, what kind of strong reinforcements did our deputy commander bring back?" This is equivalent to a 10,000-man archer legion, King Lang muttered to himself. General Seamus comforted Lang. I heard that the Windrunner family is the top ranger family in Kuel Salis. Lang felt a little better after hearing that. General Seamus was right about this. The Windrunner family's rangers were indeed the most powerful among the High Elves. Looking at the entire human world, including the High Elves, and even the more powerful Night Elves, there was no army that could compare to the Windrunner family's archers. Perhaps the legendary mysterious army that belonged to High Priestess Tyron could compare to the Windrunner family's rangers. However, the horrors of the tribes were not only in their powerful individual combat power, but also in their terrifying numbers. When they found that there were more and more ships anchored on the western coast, the irascible orcs decisively ignored the orders from their superiors and began to rush their ships to any place that could be anchored. For example, the eastern beach, which had higher mountains and was better defended by humans. Another example was the harbor of Southshore itself. When the first light of dawn broke, the main force of the Horde's beach landing battle finally arrived. The gigantic iron ship crashed into the stone pier with a loud bang, causing the entire pier to shake. Duke saw through his binoculars that the deep water port that he had spent a long time building was smashed into by the group of bastards, and the sky was filled with flying rocks. Duke wished he could kill all the orcs. Damn it, my secret stash. Duke muttered in his heart. On the other side, Turayan was also muttering, in the name of the holy light, they are too ugly. Even though Lothar and Duke had described them before, it was still a far cry from seeing them with his own eyes. He did not know if the stronger the orcs were, the uglier they were. Turayan, who had personally witnessed the death of the tribe's laborers, had originally thought that the Horde's warriors were about the size of burly humans, with light green skin and two huge tiger teeth in their mouths. Now, Turayan realized that he was completely wrong. The real warriors of the tribe were taller and more burly, and they looked even uglier. They had bright green skin and red eyes that were even redder than a rabbit's. And those huge fangs that could not even be covered by their lips. Turayan swore that he had only seen something like this on a wild boar. But wild boars did not walk on 2 feet, nor did they carry huge heavy weapons, nor did they wear heavy armor. Duque pretended to observe with his binoculars, and then said the answer that was marked in the system notification, "All right, generals, I have good news and bad news." Everyone immediately pricked up their ears. The good news is that the Horde is finally willing to put in the main force. Lothar, you can consider calling back the reserve troops that were stationed outside. Lothar smiled slightly. To be on the safe side, Lothar divided about 1/3 of the troops that had been gathered in Southshore and placed them in the middle of the Hillsbrad Hills, which was probably the inland area between Southshore and Atonement Island. Lothar did not comment on Duque's suggestion. Because if they called back the reserve troops, they might not be of any help. If they did not call back the reserve troops, they could still be used as insurance. At most, they would receive complaints from 1 or 2 kings that their troops could not do anything. Lothar smiled and asked, "What about the bad news?" Chapter 256. It's the Warsong clan from the tribe. They're not just good at fighting, they're quite good at it. What we need to pay attention to is the roar of their chief, Gromhel. He's a top-notch person, especially you, Commander-in-Chief Lothar. I don't want the Commander-in-Chief of the Alliance to be at the front. I know you're good at fighting too, but there are so many generals around. As the Commander-in-Chief, do you have the cheek to steal the credit of your subordinates? Initially, when he heard Duque say that Grom was impressive, Lothar was really eager to give it a try. After hearing what Duque said, Lothar could only raise his hands to indicate that he wouldn't go to the front line. There was a silent commotion among the other generals when Lothar didn't take action. Pairs of burning eyes looked at Duque, eager for Duque to call out the name of a certain person or a certain legion. The current situation was like a predetermined victory. The only difference was whether the price paid was high. However, it seemed like it would be a great victory for now. Everyone yearned for victory. The kings, who had different thoughts in the first place, were even more eager for their legions to perform well in this battle, because it would affect their country's right to speak in the alliance. Trash had no rights. That wasn't just a matter of words. More and more transport ships arrived at the seaside. There were so many ships from the tribe that the long coastline was actually not enough for all of them. The brave warriors of the Warsong clan pushed the front line to the middle of the mountain. They endured the fist-sized rocks that filled the sky and the arrows that could easily penetrate their bodies. When one fell, another would immediately take his place. When a group fell, a new group would immediately rush in. They were using their flesh and blood to corrode the humans' defense line at a high speed. The agile movements of the Warsong clan warriors, their exaggerated jumping ability, and their violent strength made the soldiers of the Rotterdam very uncomfortable. In just 10 minutes, Mograine had already sent out the reserve team for the third time. Even though he still had sufficient reserves, the sight of such a meat grinder made his heart bleed. They were all the elites of the Rotterdam kingdom. At this moment, 2 red signal flares rose in the direction of the headquarters. In this world where the light of dawn was still very faint, it was especially dazzling. In the east, the Fourth Fleet, which had been waiting for a long time, puffed up their sails and arrived at the battlefield within 15 minutes. Then, far from the coast, they fired their cannons at the densely packed coastline. From today onwards, this cruel weapon would probably become one of the most hated weapons in the tribe. 100 thumb-sized, relatively round iron lumps could be stuffed into a huge cannon chamber. Because of the short range, Commander Ku Tiras ordered that each cannon be loaded with 20% less gunpowder and 30% more grapeshot than usual. Bang! 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 Following the loud roar, the coastline that was not particularly wide was immediately set off in a storm of blood. The new armor that the orcs had obtained from the dwarven slaves was completely unable to withstand the impact of such hot weapons. A head-sized bloody hole would immediately appear on their bodies if they were hit by it. Even the lightest injury would be a broken arm or leg. Large pieces of broken limbs flew into the air. There were split heads, splattered intestines, and broken weapons. In a few breaths, the entire coastline had become the orcs' Shiraba. The seawater that surged up along with the tide was all dyed red with the blood of the orcs. The tragic scarlet spread hundreds of meters away on the surface of the sea, and it was all orc blood. The tribe's commander ordered the transport ship to rush towards Ku Tiras' battleship. Unfortunately, it did not work this time. An orc laborer who was rowing the boat could not help but exclaim, "There's something down there, there's a lot of it." The laborer pointed at the large opening for the oars. As soon as he finished speaking, he was dragged underwater along with the oars. Blood gushed out, and it seemed that he would not survive. At this time, there were already quite a number of slightly fat black figures on the surface of the sea. Colorful triangular dorsal fins broke through the water surface, forming white waves. Those who were familiar with them would know at a glance that they were murlocs. It was not the first time that the tribe had dealt with the murlocs. They also knew that the humans of Stormwind City had the ability to tame the murlocs, although they did not know which one. It felt as normal as an orc taming a warg. That alone was not enough to alert the tribe. Until the tribe suddenly realized that the number of murlocs was 2F** king ridiculous. It was impossible to count how many there were. All they knew was that this was definitely more than 10,000. Not only the orcs, but even the human guards on the hill were stunned. At first, Duque did not send out the murlocs because Duque felt that it would not be effective to let the murlocs intercept the transport ships rushing towards the coast at high speed. Now it was different. Most of the gaps along the coast had been filled. If the tribe wanted to reach the shore, they would either have to smash the butt of their own ship and disembark in deeper water. Or they would continue west to find a place to dock. In fact, continuing west was the right choice. But the appearance of Ku Tiras' fleet dispelled the tribe's commander's thoughts. What was worse was that the transport ships that attempted to attack the Alliance's fleet had all stopped. If the tribe's ships were powered by sails, the Murlocs would not be able to cut off the ship's power. But it was oars. For the Murlocs to deal with wooden oars that were not specially reinforced was a matter of minutes. Under the command of the Murloc Oracle Maugre, the Murlocs also became smarter. They worked hard to destroy every Horde transport ship. They used all kinds of methods to break the oars of the laborers and dig into the bottom of the Horde transport ships. Like sardines, the transport ships were packed with hundreds of people. Even if one of them sank, it would be a big loss to the tribe. Looking at the situation of the battle, the 5 kings in the command center were all beaming with joy. Yo, Horde, hurry up and play your cards. I don't know who the commander is, but if you don't play your cards, I'll have to take the lives of another 100,000 orcs this time. At this moment, a loud noise suddenly erupted from one of the large battleships in Kutiras's fleet. In the next second, the huge mast broke, pulling the entire ship and causing it to tilt at an angle of 60 degrees to the water. If the first attack could be reluctantly attributed to an accident, then the second attack was witnessed by Duque with his own eyes. On the left side of the battleship's bow, a huge crack about half a meter wide and at least 7 or 8 meters long was drawn out by a Black Shadow's weapon like it was killing a fish. The entire hull of the battleship let out a sad cry, then the huge bow suddenly broke, the hull tilted, and a large amount of seawater poured into the cabin. Duque could clearly see that many human soldiers had already jumped into the sea to escape. Damn! Who was it? That didn't make sense. Duque screamed in his heart. The next moment, he saw the killer's weapon. It was a dark red axe that looked like a hook. That was a certain Roar's signature weapon, Blood Howl. Chapter 257. Grom Hellroar was mighty and domineering. Whether it was his trademark roar, his courage, or his unparalleled violent attack power. Tearing a lion apart with his bare hands and going through countless battles without a single defeat was not enough to describe the domineering Grom, whom Duque had called Lord Howl before he transmigrated. If one had to describe Grom's strength in one sentence, it would be that he could dismantle a Gundam with his bare hands. The story began with Grom's father, Galmash Hellroar, whom Duque called Grandpa Howl. Galmash was the chief of the Warsong clan. He was a powerful warrior during his lifetime and was known as the Giant Butcher. Few orcs could be like him, both deeply respected by his own clansmen and terrifying his enemies. One time, Galmash and his clansmen encountered a huge Golan, and a fierce battle ensued. What was a Golan? A Golan was a terrifying one-eyed monster that was 2 or 3 times taller than an ogre. Duque believed that only the one-eyed giants of ancient Greece before he transmigrated could be the prototype of this monster called Golan. During the fierce battle, Galmash was caught by the Golan. When his body was bitten to pieces by the Golan's guillotine-like mouth, Galmash endured the pain and used the last of his strength to chop his battle-axe, Gorehowl, into the Golan's eye before he died. When they fell, the first to die was the Golan. After this battle, Gorehowl became famous everywhere and became the symbol of the Warsong clan's chief. Galmash eventually earned the surname Hellroar for his clan. The Hellroar clan was also very good at fighting huge things. For example, such a huge warship had been dismantled by Grom in a few moves. Were the tribal heroes really monsters? Although Duque wanted to push Lothar, who had the highest combat power on his side, and Uther, who had just arrived last night, to fight Lord Howl for 300 rounds, the problem was that this was AF** King naval battle. Could Lothar and Uther, who were fully armored, win? Don't be ridiculous. If these two powerful people drowned because of this reason, Duque would not be able to forgive himself. Just as Uther was about to step out and ask to fight with a fearless spirit of sacrifice, Duque said, "Hey, Aurelia, Servanas, do you hear me?" An echo immediately came from the wind. Aurelia awaits Deputy Commander's orders. Yo, there's finally something exciting to do. Duque cleared his throat and said, "I want you 2 sisters to deal with the onion-haired orc chief who just tore down our warship." Yes, the one with the blood-red hooked axe. His name was Grom Hellscream, and he was one of the strongest fighters in the Horde. Don't be careless. I promise I'll kill him. Aurelia was as steady as ever. "Oh. Sister, let's not compete in killing enemies. Those moving targets aren't that great. Let's compete to see who can kill more chiefs." This time, it was a voice that only Duque could hear. Duque was under a lot of pressure when faced with such an off-topic Queen Sylvanas. Uther couldn't help it anymore. He stepped forward and said, "Deputy Commander, Uther and his silver hand request to fight." Duque glanced at Uther, who was much older than him, and said, "I know your chivalry can't stand having a woman fight on your behalf. But I want to tell you, first, don't treat the sisters as weak. Second, unless you're very good at swimming in armor, leave it to the two sisters." Uther was quite annoyed by Duque, but as a noble paladin, he knew very well that Duque was not targeting him or looking down on his silver hand. It was just that Uther was as puzzled as the other generals. Why did Duque seem to know their abilities and specialties so well? From the beginning of the Battle of Southshore, Duque's formation had no flaws or problems. Not only could he predict the enemy, but he was also very clear about his own people. The problem was that Duque hadn't even visited their troops. Naturally, Duque didn't have time to explain to them. Or perhaps Duque couldn't explain at all. He'd arranged it according to which of them was more powerful in history. No matter what, the destructive power of a heroic existence was shocking. As someone who also had a heroic template, Lord Howl had already used Blood Howl to dismantle 5 warships of various sizes by the time the Windrunner sisters arrived. Grom didn't let his guard down at all just because the 2 beautiful elven rangers were dainty and delicate. On the contrary, his instincts towards the strong made Grom very nervous. It was as if he was a dragonfly skimming the surface of the water. His ability to jump over the transport ships and even the junk floating on the sea was beyond Grom's imagination. This level of agility was unheard of. Grom Hellscream felt a wave of disgust. This was the unique aesthetics of the orcs. The Windrunner sisters were as beautiful as goddesses in the eyes of humans, but in the eyes of the orcs, who loved broad shoulders, thick waists, and large hips, they were weak goods that couldn't give birth to strong children. Lord Howl's disdainful gaze made Aurelia the Great Demon King and Queen Sylvanas even more displeased. "Humph." 6 nostrils and 3 heroes snorted coldly. It had to be said that this was a strange misunderstanding. It didn't matter. Only a dead enemy was the best enemy. This principle was applicable in every world. Since they didn't speak the same language, there was no need to greet each other. The Windrunner sisters and Lord Howl faced each other directly. They moved forward on the waves so fast that the naked eye couldn't keep up with them. The Windrunner sisters stood on the left and right. They shot a barrage of arrows while approaching Lord Howl at high speed. Grom grabbed a stack of shields hanging on the railing of the ship. He easily tore the ropes binding the shields. They were originally used by humans for boarding battles, but Lord Howl pulled them up. 5 or 6 shields turned into flying discs that could cut a human in half and were thrown out. Of course, such a rough throw wouldn't hit. Sylvanas actually took a step forward with her slender and beautiful legs, stepping on those floating shields and flying high up in the sky. In just 10 seconds, Grom was hit by at least 30 arrows. He looked bloody and miserable, but the Windrunner sisters realized that none of the arrows actually penetrated Grom's muscles or hit his organs. The arrows that were aimed at Grom's fatal spots were either blocked or dodged by Bloodhowl. Just as the Windrunner sisters were within 5 meters of Grom, Lord Howl counterattacked. A deafening roar spread out like a shockwave around the sinking ship, and the 2 sisters trembled. The next moment, the wooden boards under Lord Howl's feet turned to dust. With a swift leap, he slashed at Sylvanas. Chapter 258. Lord Howl's leap slash was unscientific. In a fantasy world with all kinds of special skills, talking about science was bullsh*t. It looked like a simple leap and fall, but whether it was going up or down, it had nothing to do with the acceleration of gravity. Bloodhowl's blazing red light shot into the sky. For a moment, it was like a scarlet sun had suddenly appeared out of nowhere. It was shocking and dazzling. The next moment, Grom, who held the axe with both hands, slashed down like a falling meteor. Speed up. Speed up. Speed up continuously. Insanely fast speed up. A moment ago, Grom was still about 10 meters away from Sylvanas. It felt like Queen Sylvanas could easily dodge with a light stomp of her feet. In the next moment, the sharp tip of the axe had already chopped down on a few strands of Queen Syriana's bangs that were leaking out of her hood. At this moment, the sharp whistle of the axe cutting through the air had just spread. This attack broke the speed of sound. This was the attack that the Hellscream family was famous for. Lord Howl's father had used this attack to kill countless ogres and Goblin. Lord Howl himself would also kill the night elf demigod Cenarius and the demon lord of the abyss, Manaroth, who was even bigger than the heavy truck Duque was in before he transmigrated. No, when Duque, who was in the command center, saw this scene through the magician's eye that had been monitoring the battlefield, he was so shocked that he stood up abruptly. Cold sweat instantly soaked his entire back. Could it be that Queen Sylvanas, who was supposed to shine brightly on the stage of the world of Azeroth in the future, would fall here? It was still World War II at the Dark Portal. There was no Doomsday Army at all. It could be said that Queen Sylvanas' death here was death. She would never be reincarnated. Unless, Duque did not dare to imagine it. However, in his nervousness and shock, Duque had forgotten someone, Aurelia. As the big sister of the Windrunner family, how could she let her sister die in front of her? Indeed, Sylvanas was still immature. She was far from the all-powerful Dark Ranger and Queen of the Undead in the future, who could shake the world with a stomp of her foot. This was the reason why Duque had asked the two sisters to deal with Master Ho in the name of the Alliance's deputy marshal. Aurelia raised her leg and kicked Queen Sylvanas in the butt, allowing her to narrowly avoid the attack. Bloodhowl was still slashing down. Seeing that she could not hit Aurelia, Queen Sylvie was about to chop off one of Aurelia's legs. Illyria's battle-hardened experience came into play. In that split second, she used the 3 arrows in her right hand to stab Grom's face. At the same time, the muscles on her abdomen bulged. She used her waist strength to turn her kick into a whip kick towards Grom's knee. Perhaps Grom could chop off one of Aurelia's legs. However, the price was that Master Ho's face would be pierced by 3 arrows. This was a fighting style that traded injuries for lives. Grom's expression changed, and a serious expression appeared on his rugged face. He didn't expect that such a delicate and strange human could actually have such a ferocious fighting style. He finally realized that it wouldn't be that easy to win. Grom cancelled his jump slash. The muscles on his arm bulged, and he swung a whirlwind slash instead of a slash. In the blink of an eye, a violent tornado appeared. All the surrounding wood was chopped into sawdust, and even the seawater was sucked away. Grom looked like a small tornado on the ocean. The Windrunner sisters jumped away swiftly. "Sister, are you all right?" Sylvanas knew that her carelessness had dragged her sister into this. She couldn't help but look at Aurelia's leg, which had been cut into pieces and was bleeding. Aurelia's face twitched. She wanted to comfort her sister and say that she was fine, but in the end, she said in High Elf language, "I'm fine, but I'll be a little slower." Orcs had thick skin and flesh, so they were fine even after being hit by dozens of arrows. However, for the Windrunner, who relied on speed and agility for a living, being a little slower could mean the difference between life and death. It wasn't an exaggeration to say that Grom's strong physique allowed him to make many mistakes. If the Windrunner sisters made one mistake, they would be doomed eternally. Gritting her teeth, Queen Sylvanas said coldly, "Sister, cover him from afar." Okay. Even though she was a little worried, this was the only way. While Grom's whirlwind slash was over, Sylvanas slung her longbow and unsheathed her sword. Aurelia, on the other hand, opened up a distance of 20 meters and covered her sister with a continuous barrage of shots. In the command center, Duque finally relaxed when he saw that the Windrunner sisters and Hellscream were evenly matched. This was an exchange of chess pieces. Duque suddenly had an idea. He wasn't afraid of the orcs attacking with a large army, but what if a few powerful chiefs came? Although there was only one Hellscream, there were many talented orcs, and Grom Hellscream wasn't the only one. There were also Gujar and Samuro. Wait. Samuro? Duque suddenly realized where his weakness was. Tyrion Fordring. Unsure why Duque would call his name without Uther, Tyrion, who was ready to go down the mountain at any time, stepped forward. Yes. I'm worried about General Lang Rin at the front lines. I need you to go there immediately and follow General Lang closely during this battle. Bodyguard. Tyrion's face was a little gloomy. In his opinion, a paladin should be the kind of person who charged and broke through enemy lines, not a bodyguard. Duque's voice came again. I suddenly remembered that the orcs have a special class called Blademaster. They have a stealth ability similar to thieves, but they move faster and seem to have some kind of strange power when they attack. Tyrion, this is a heavy responsibility. If something happens to General Lang, it will be a heavy blow to not only the battle for Southshore, but the entire alliance. If you go this time, no matter what happens, I will remember you. Understood. Duque's transfer was a matter of life and death. Ryan was wearing a golden helmet and armor. Although he could arouse the courage of the Storm Wind soldiers, his existence was also very conspicuous to the tribe. Just as a sword suddenly slashed at Lang from behind, Tyrion arrived. Holy shock, one of the few long-range attacks of a paladin. The attack came at the most needed time and place. The sneak attack stunned the Blade Master for a moment. It was also at this moment that Lang and General Tom realized what was going on. Two intersecting swords slashed at the blurry figure that was gradually becoming clearer. However, this Blade Master obviously didn't give up. Blade Storm suddenly rolled up. Chapter 259. It was another tornado-like attack, but compared to Grom's whirlwind slash, the Blade Storm was the real tornado, the real killer move. A terrifying tornado made of blood and wind swept up from the top of the mountain. Under the high-speed rotation, whether it was Theon, Lang, or Tom, they all lost track of the mysterious sword saint who had ambushed them. They could barely see a green figure spinning at high speed in the turbulent air currents. As Lang retreated with his sword, the Wang family guards beside him rushed forward without any regard for their own lives. The result was that the guards were instantly minced into meat paste. Looking at the familiar faces he had known for many years being killed by the sword, Lang almost wanted to rush into the storm of sword energy and fight it out with the other party. Tom Seamus slammed backwards, using his sturdy pauldrons to push Lang out of the Blade Storm's killing range. However, the other party chased after him like a shadow, determined to kill Lang. This was no longer a swordsmanship. The high-speed rotation of his body brought with it countless sword energies that were like real swords, slashing horizontally at everything that tried to block his way. The human bodies clad in standard iron armor, the thickened shields wrapped in wooden planks, the trenches dug around the mountain, and the stone pillboxes, everything looked so sturdy. However, all these seemingly indestructible things had become victims of the Blade Storm's terrifying meat grinder. The human body was cut into pieces, and even if it was picked up, it would not know how to piece it back together. The shield was cut into pieces. The trenches were instantly opened up. And the stone pillbox was directly lifted off the roof. The attack of this berserk sword saint was completely beyond human imagination. At this moment, Lang suddenly calmed down and accepted reality. He was very grateful to Tyrion Fordring who came at the last moment, and he knew very well that he was sent by Duque at a critical moment. But this kind of power was not something a mortal could resist, right? Listening to the high-speed cutting sound, Lang helplessly closed his eyes with a bitter smile. 1 second. 2 seconds. 5 seconds, the blade that represented death never came. Instead, it emitted an intense sound of metal clashing not far from him. Theon's tall and burly figure stood in front of him and Seamus like a nail. The storm of blades slashed at him. Countless swords on his body. Dismember the corpse into 10,000 pieces. None of this happened. Instead, Lang saw an oval cover that glowed with a holy golden light appear on Theon's body. It was this shield that withstood the seemingly invincible blade storm. Was this really a god? Looking at the System Elf's report, Duque was a little confused. Congratulations, Tyrion Fordring, who you urgently dispatched to the eastern battlefield, saved King Lang at the critical moment with Blessing of Sacrifice and Divine Protection. King Lang's attitude towards you has risen to entrust life and death. Duque knew what it meant, but Duque was more interested in Theon's two skills. Blessing of Sacrifice, use the power of the holy light to protect an ally, so that the user of the blessing bears a portion of any kind of damage. Divine Protection, stimulate the holy light in the body, using the power of the holy light to make oneself immune to all attacks for a few seconds. The holy light in this world seemed to be more powerful than he had imagined. On the other side, seeing that he couldn't kill Lang even with his ultimate move, the mysterious sword saint reluctantly retreated. His figure disappeared into thin air. After using his ultimate move, he would probably fall into a period of weakness for a long time. That kind of terrifying move, which concentrated all of his strength for a few days in an instant, would not come without a price. He wouldn't have to worry about that guy for a long time. At this time, in the image of the mage's eyes, he saw that Duque had sent Theon to save King Lang. There was a burst of applause in the command center. That's amazing. Vice Commander. Oh my god, how did you think of that? Duque was flattered because this was praise from the 5 kings of the Alliance. Although he had saved his boss, saving Lang was also helping these kings. With a great enemy in front of them, no one wanted the Alliance to fall apart. Well, now we just need to. Before Duque finished speaking, he saw a hunchbacked figure appear in the vision of the mage's eyes. In the next instant, the mage's eyes was destroyed. However, Duque saw that on the 2 hilltops closest to the port, 2 fire rain areas the size of 4 football fields had fallen. A fire rain area the size of 8 football fields. Was this done by an ordinary warlock? Duke and Antonidas looked out of the window at the same time, looking at the burning hills in the distance, and the people on fire who were writhing in pain. Those little people on fire in their field of vision were the elites of the Alliance. On top of the hill, the volume of the screams suddenly doubled, and then quickly quieted down. And on the beach, naturally, the cheers of the orcs burst out. With the help of the System Elf, a figure that was originally just a small black dot rapidly expanded in Duque's vision, and expanded again and again. It was a hunchbacked orc holding an evil skull staff. His face was old, his movements unsteady, and his back was full of huge bone spikes. It felt like this guy didn't need anyone to touch him, he might throw himself to his death on the road in the next second. But no matter who Duque looked down on, he wouldn't look down on this mysterious orc who used water float to stand on the waves, his body swaying up and down with the waves. He was the terrifying existence that stood at the end of the path of evil in the mortal world. The muscles on Duque's face kept twitching, and his face was ashen as he squeezed out 3 words with great difficulty. Ghoul, Dan. Duque was absolutely sure that the historical ghoul, Dan, did not participate in the Battle of the Hillsbrad Hills. He didn't know if it was because the butterfly Duque had changed the course of fate too much, but it actually attracted Ghoul, Dan. The only thing he could rejoice about now was that Ghoul, Dan was no longer that demigod Ghoul, Dan. After being tricked by Medivh, Ghoul, Dan's strength had dropped by at least half. Unfortunately, even if Ghoul, Dan's strength had dropped by half, he was still not someone that the Sky Wizard Duque could contend against. Duque walked over to Antonidas and bowed deeply. Apologies, Chairman Antonidas. The other party was once a demigod warlock, the strongest orc in the mysterious domain, Ghoul, Dan. Other than you, only Kuel Salus Sun King can contend against him. Facing the expectant gazes from all directions, Antonidas leaned on his staff and stroked his long white beard, his face filled with the pride of a strong person. Ha ha ha. The Dalajan will not refuse responsibility. The same goes for the Dalajan chairman. Chapter 260. Duque heaved a sigh of relief when Antonidas agreed to fight. Ghoul Dan's appearance really made Duque feel like he was in a dog's den. Duque knew that a treacherous fellow like Ghoul Dan would not work for Orgrim wholeheartedly. However, there were some enemies in this world that even if you knew they wouldn't be serious, you still had to deal with them with all your might. This was a boss, this was power. Duque looked at Ghoul Dan's arrogant figure and bit his lips. After he was done with this, he really had to cultivate his strength properly. His strength had to match the situation. Duque knew that even as a Breaking Dawn wizard, he would not be able to survive an attack from hundreds of thousands of beast men. Moreover, he was not one yet. Without the support of the Alliance, even if he had the strength of a god, he would still be overwhelmed to death. In the future, Antonidas had died here, as had the Sun King Anastrian Sunstrider. Fortunately, Duque was not the one who had to face Ghoul Dan head-on today. Antonidas lightly waved his staff in the air. Without anyone seeing how he chanted an incantation, mysterious runes formed a long line in the air in front of them. 3 seconds later, this line was stretched open by some mysterious power, turning into an oval that allowed one person to pass through. On the other side of the circle of light was the empty gate of Southshore. That was the gate that connected the docks to Southshore. The beast men were not idiots. They knew that if they did not get rid of the humans on the 2 hills and rushed into the town, they would just be sending themselves to their deaths. Under the scolding of the tribe's commanders, the beast men all charged towards the hills. In the midst of the intense battle, there was an empty patch of land. The next moment, Antonidas appeared alone at the gates of the town. Oh! I didn't think there would be a human wizard who would dare to fight. Ghoul Dan muttered in the human language 200 meters away. However, he knew that Antonidas would hear him. Hee, I also want to know what kind of strength a demigod once had. Antonidas was old and shrewd. It seemed to be a compliment, but in fact, it was an outright insult. Ghoul Dan waved his magic staff and death ripples formed from the power of darkness spread out from the surface of the sea. Instantly, countless fishmen 100 meters away were hit. For a moment, the entire surface of the sea surged. Large amounts of blood and corpses were boiling and roaring like boiling water. Ghoul Dan's face was black as he coldly replied, I can kill you even with half of my strength. Come. Antonidas beckoned. Without further ado, the 2 men's spells collided in midair. At that moment, the whole of Southshore, with the dock as the boundary, flashed with elemental light of different colors. On the side close to the town, fire, ice, and arcana runes of 3 different colors appeared densely. With the dock as the boundary, the side close to the sea flashed with overlapping crimson flames and black shadow magic formations, and they also contained a large amount of mysterious and evil aura. 2 completely different scenes occupied the center of the battlefield, completely enveloping the whole of Southshore and spreading in all directions. The next moment, the spells that poured out from the magic formations around the 2 men collided. The destructive flames and bone-chilling ice collided fiercely in midair. The ice shards and the aftermath of the flames formed a terrifying steam that roasted any creature that tried to get close to it. The evil shadow arrows were scattered by the fireballs, dyeing the nearby grass black, and the vitality of all the plants and animals that came into contact with them instantly withered. The aftermath of the scattered flames was not inferior in any way. It easily burned everything that could be burned. The azure arcane radiance violently shot at the curses that were mysteriously drifting over, rendering the warlock's most mysterious pain attribute curses useless. The battle between these 2 was even more terrifying than the battle of 10 wizard squads. The shockwaves of the fierce battle easily swept through the town. Duque had long since decided to make Southshore the main battlefield, and he had long since moved the residents away. However, Seeing these two freakishly powerful people fight, Duque was still overwhelmed with shock. After all, this was not even Ghoul Dan at his peak. Even now, Ghoul Dan still had to use more than half of his power to maintain the darkness portal. In other words, Ghoul Dan had used less than a quarter of his power to fight Antonidas, one of the two Breaking Dawn wizards in the world of Azeroth, to a draw. At this moment, the whole of Southshore, as well as the places between the two hills, seemed to have encountered a terrifying natural disaster. It was a combination of a tornado and an earthquake. The brick and wood houses on both sides of the main road above the town collapsed like dominoes. Huge trees were thrown into the air by the powerful shockwaves, but before they landed, they would be bombarded by 2 or 3 different kinds of magic. Duque saw with his own eyes the top half of a tree being burned, the bottom half frozen, and finally turned into powder by the shadow arrows. Antonidas raised his staff, and the sea around Ghoul Dan was instantly interwoven with a blue magical radiance. In less than half a second, nearly 100 giant water elementals with 2 thick arms and their upper bodies in the shape of an inverted triangle suddenly appeared from the sea. These water elementals did not say anything, and directly shot over 100 frost arrows at Ghoul Dan. Ghoul Dan also waved his hand, and dozens of dark blue inverted triangular, blue fatties appeared beside him. These strange demons that came from the void used their huge bodies as the best magic shields. At the same time, near the town gate, a spatial passage connected to the void was opened, and many demon hounds that targeted magic professions pounced out, charging straight at Antonidas. Humph. The Dalajan president snorted coldly. Countless ice spikes appeared from the ground and pierced into the sky. The demon hounds that should have been able to suppress mages had no resistance against the physical damage caused by the elemental transformation. As if they were skewered, their abdomens were easily pierced from the bottom up. Some of them even had their heads cut off by the ice, and they became corpses before they could rise up. The magic energy that burst out of their bodies formed a terrifying pressure. This kind of pressure could easily draw an invisible boundary on the battlefield. Even if there were no magic waves in that area, those who were not strong enough would not dare to cross it. Seeing that Duque's arrangement had once again offset the horde's attack, Lothar walked over. "What are you waiting for, Duque?" "I'm waiting for the exchange. When the horde's cards are gone, it will be the death of the 100,000 horde troops," Duque said coldly. Chapter 261. Everyone in the command center's eyes lit up. They didn't know how many soldiers the horde had left. Adding the 100,000 orcs here and the ones intercepted by Dalen's fleet, it was definitely a heavy blow to the horde. From the looks of it, the humans wouldn't lose more than 20,000 people. No matter how one looked at it, this was a great victory that only happened once in a century. Duque had just retracted his gaze from the Windrunner sisters, who were evenly matched with Master Howl. He was shocked to find that the battle between the strongest sorcerer of Azeroth and the strongest sorcerer of Draenor had already come to an end. It was a draw. Antonidas and Ghoul Dan clutched at their wounds. The left shoulder of Antonidas' sorcerer robe had been burned. A black rune with an evil aura was wriggling on Antonidas' old body. Antonidas was using arcane energy to dispel the rune, but it wasn't very effective. On the other side, Ghoul Dan had also been hit. A huge ice prism had pierced through his left shoulder. From the wound, ice patterns spread toward Ghoul Dan's heart like a spider web. Ghoul Dan injected the destructive flames in his hand into his shoulder to resist the invasion of the cold. "Humph. I'll spare your life today. Next time, I'll leave your filthy head behind." The two of them turned around and left without hesitation. Antonidas reluctantly teleported back to the command center. Ghoul Dan waved his hand and turned into a cloud of black fog, disappearing from the sea. "Master, how are you?" "Uther, come and help." The place where Antonidas was covered started to emit thick darkness. The sticky black aura had a strong sense of ominous, and it tried to drill into the depths of the old magician's body and corrode his magic circuits. Fortunately, Uther's holy light was even brighter. Even though sweat was dripping from his forehead, Uther spent about 5 minutes to completely dispel the darkness. "Thank you. It seems like the Holy Knight is a great profession," Antonidas praised sincerely. Antonidas praised from the bottom of his heart. He then turned to Duke. "What a terrifying orc warlock. I'm no match for him. If I go all out, I'll definitely be the one to die. At most, I'll only be able to injure him moderately. I don't know why he's pretending to be heavily injured. All I can say is that he'll need at most a week to recover, but I might not be able to fight for the Alliance by then." "Don't worry. He won't come again," Duque said with absolute certainty. "Are you sure?" "Yes." Duque turned to look at Crassus in the Dalajan crowd. "Please send Mr. President back to the Dalajan first, and then ask Archbishop Fao to go to the Dalajan and check Mr. President thoroughly. It would have been best to send Antonidas to Lordaeron. Due to political reasons, Antonidas would rather stay in his old nest to recuperate." Crassus quickly opened a portal, connected it to the Dalajan, and sent Antonidas away. Not long after, Crassus opened a portal and hurried back. The orcs were not stupid. After their several charges were repelled, no matter how stupid they were, they realized that with so many people crowded on the coast, sooner or later they would be wiped out. They gave up the blind attack and seemed to be waiting for something. Duque's pupils suddenly shrank to the size of a needle's eye. "It's here. It's finally here." Duque stood up and slammed his hand on the table. "Pass the order, all cavalry regiments are ready to launch a countercharge against the enemy along the established route. All reserves are to enter combat positions, with the spear team and the javelin team as the main force." It was finally their turn. In the command center, a group of tough generals had been waiting impatiently. If it weren't for Duque's magnificent command, suppressing the tribes time and time again, maybe some kings would have protested. Now with Duque's order, more than half of the people in the command center left. As he walked down the hill, Uther was a little puzzled. "General Lothar, are we going to counterattack from the ruins of South Shore to the coast? I'm still wondering about this order. Are there any cavalry on the tribe's side? I don't think there's anything in the tribe that can stop your cavalry regiment and my silver hand." General Haas, the commander of Alterac, was also puzzled. "It's even more strange on my side. They actually want my Eagle Knights to attack the enemy along the slope of the East Hill, which is not too steep. The Eagle Knights are indeed mountain knights, and they are also used to fighting in complex terrain. But I see that General Lang's infantry is also doing well. I can't think of a reason for reinforcements." Lothar smiled. It was an extremely sunny smile. "Can you write 10 or 20 reports at the same time?" "No," Uther answered truthfully. "How is that possible?" Haas asked rhetorically. "But I know that strong mages have the metamagic ability, multicasting. That is, the ability to do 2 things at the same time, or even many things. Duque is such a genius, he can quickly read many times more reports than we do. He also often finds a lot of details that we don't notice. For those threats that he is uncertain about, he will make preparations, but because he can't convince everyone, he will be used to silence." Lothar paused and continued, "However, it has been proven again and again that the preparations he has made and the backup he has arranged are correct and effective. Even if I don't want to admit it, I have to admit that he is above me in terms of the overall situation and the art of command. If he were a melee professional, maybe he would be the commander-in-chief." What Lothar said was another fact of this era. People who regarded chivalry as the supreme tended to admire melee heroes more than the mysterious and unpredictable spellcasters. More people subconsciously believed that only those who fought head-on were real men. 10 minutes later, the signal to attack came. Many new creatures appeared on the coast, much taller than the orcs. Except for a few orcs who could be more than 3 meters tall, the orcs were generally about 2.5 meters tall. But these creatures could easily reach a height of about 4 meters. Ogres. These huge creatures joined the battle. They waved giant sticks that looked like uprooted trees. They roared and rushed up the hill. Bows and javelins were useless. Even if a dozen spears pierced the bodies of the ogres, they wouldn't be able to end the lives of these ferocious monsters unless they pierced their vitals. And every time the giant wooden sticks were swung, a bunker was smashed, and an entire row of shield soldiers was smashed away. The shield wall that the humans relied on to fight against the orcs became the biggest fatal weakness, which allowed the ogres to cause massive casualties with every blow. Apart from the ballistae and cannons on the top of the hill, there was nothing that could stop the march of these giant creatures. The soldiers were defeated by this powerful blow. The orc soldiers attacked through those gaps and quickly spread out, sweeping up the alliance soldiers in the trenches. A group of figures wearing heavy cloaks and riding heavily armored warhorses appeared on the slightly dilapidated pier, each horse's eyes shining with dazzling red light. Chapter 262. The Eagle Knights led by Has attacked the horde along the river at the foot of the eastern hill. Now that Antonidas and Dan were no longer in the way, in order to attack the eastern mountain in a more comprehensive manner, many tribes first came to the river bank and then took a detour to attack the mountain from the side. When the Eagle Knights arrived, the defensive line on the hill was already very tight. On the front line, Tyrion and General Tom could often be seen leading the reserves as firefighters to fill in the gaps in the position. From time to time, even Lang had to personally lead the troops into battle. The only good thing was that Stormwind's reserves were quite sufficient. It was just that the casualty ratio was shocking. It was under these circumstances that the Eagle Knights circled around to the flank of the horde attacking the hill. "Level your spears," Has shouted. The knights lowered their nearly 4-meter-long spears and urged their mountain horses to charge from the side. Alterax's Eagle Knights weren't heavy cavalry in the traditional sense. Considering the mountainous terrain, the armor of this group of knights was between light cavalry and heavy cavalry. They didn't have heavy armor, only light chain mail and a layer of leather armor. The warhorses were also only equipped with a piece of leather armor. On the complicated terrain of the river and the hills, the Eagle Knights performed quite well. With the heavy sound of hooves, the knights quickly scattered, looking for their own targets. When the target was more than 2 meters away, they had already stabbed their spears, hitting the enemy's vitals. At the same time, the momentum of the warhorses pierced deep into the enemy's body. At the same time, the well-designed spear couldn't withstand the powerful reaction force and began to explode to the side. The unlucky ones who were stabbed fell to the ground, and the knights casually abandoned the remaining half of the spear, pulled out Alterax's special double-edged broadsword, and slashed at the horde's warrior's neck. The quick charge cut off the horde's fierce attack. But Has didn't stop. He took his men around the beach and quickly retreated from the river. The cavalry that had lost their speed couldn't even be compared to the infantry when faced with the tall orcs. Moreover, in that kind of fierce battle, the Eagle Knights suffered a lot of losses. The regular forces were dealt with by the regular troops. Transcendent monsters were naturally dealt with by the insanely strong paladins. Uther, who was charging forward, quickly saw the opponent that Duque had almost tailor-made for them. They covered their faces with scarves, so only their eyes could be seen. Each of them carried a huge two-handed sword. The cavalry from Lordaeron treated them like fools and were prepared to teach them a lesson with their spears. In the rules of cavalry, it was common sense to charge at each other with a lance. Using a heavy sword against a lance, this was the only way. In their hearts, they were praising their luck, and were prepared to make use of the advantage of their lances to take down the enemy. Wother heard countless unfamiliar buzzing sounds. 30 meters away, the charging cavalrymen fell to the ground in front of these guys. Even the cavalrymen of the Rotterdam Kingdom who did not fall to their deaths on the spot did not draw their swords to attack the moment they got up. Instead, they felt as if they were about to bleed from their 7 orifices as they clutched their heads tightly with both hands. "Ah!" The cavalrymen rolled on the ground in pain and let out inhuman howls. In the name of the holy light. Wother witnessed all this with his own eyes. At this moment, he completely understood why Duque wanted the Silver Hand Knights to fight against these cloaked guys. These are demons. They are using evil magic to attack us. After saying that, Wother raised his warhammer high. Several holy seals were added to the warhammer, and the top of the warhammer emitted a silver light like the moon. "Stand up, soldiers!" Wother shouted in his loud voice. "The holy light will drive away the darkness, but you must use your weapons to defend your honor." Dazzling light spread from the warhammer, echoing the bright light of dawn, and instantly driving away the darkness from the land. The holy light shone on the warriors, and when the cloaked men raised their hands again, not a single one of them fell. Although the people who got up and the cavalry behind them were still a little scared, when they found that no one fell, they mustered their courage again and let out a deafening roar, charging towards the cloaked knights. However, at the moment of fighting, not only the cavalrymen, but even Wother was stunned. This was because this group of guys were wearing the standard armor of the Stormwind cavalry. The only difference was that they used the spiked pauldrons commonly used by tribal warriors. "No!" "Why?" a Rotterdam cavalry screamed. During the days of gathering in South Shore, they had been repeatedly asked by their officers to identify the equipment of the various allies. They could not accept suddenly finding their allies standing on the opposite side of the enemy. While they were in a daze, many of them fell to the ground. Wother saw the other party's face clearly again. Their faces were pale, lifeless, and bloodless. A pair of evil blue eyes glowed with clear hostility. Most importantly, Wother did not feel any life from them. Blasphemy. The filthy tribal warlocks actually resurrected the dead into living corpses. Silver Hand, defeat them. Wother waved his huge two-handed hammer and easily knocked a Death Knight off his undead warhorse. Abundant golden holy light poured into the Death Knight's body, and the guy was blown to pieces by the holy light before he reached the ground. The Alliance soldiers cheered again, encouraged by the amazing skills and power of the paladin. Turalyon, who was at the rear, felt very conflicted. As a paladin, he should be with them, but as Lothar's adjutant, he should stay in the center of South Shore and accompany Lothar to command. The battle between the paladin and the Death Knight began, and neither side could gain the upper hand. At the beginning, Wother killed 4 or 5 Death Knights in a row, but he immediately met his opponent. A tall guy who claimed to be Terran Gorefiend actually withstood Wother's attack. Turalyon saw a Death Knight grab Dathrahan's arm with one hand when they were competing in strength. That hand that looked like a corpse radiated darkness. However, Dathrahan used the holy light to dispel the darkness. Immediately after, Dathrahan took advantage of the moment when that guy retracted his hand and directly hit his head with his hammer. Their skulls shattered like broken porcelain. Turalyon noticed that there was not a drop of blood flowing out of the skull. It was all dry brain matter. On the other hand, the Death Knights were able to win against the normal Alliance cavalry. Turalyon suddenly noticed the signal coming from the hill. Chapter 263. The Death Knights and Ogres were indeed 2 big cards. If they were ambushed by these 2 troops, the Alliance would definitely suffer heavy casualties. As a transmigrator, Duque remembered at least 70% to 80% of history. When a surprise attack was no longer a surprise attack, the so-called surprise attack would only be a joke. Duque raised his hands and waved his index fingers at the sky. Windsor immediately understood. "Send my order, the Dalajan mages get ready." "Your Excellency Kel'Thuzad." "Your Excellency Krasis." "No problem. We've been ready for a long time." Both of them replied affirmatively through the magic communication. Below, the 2 cavalries fighting fiercely on the ruins of South Shore were already fighting for real. "Send my order to retreat." Turalyon shouted to the nearest messenger. He knew that this person would use his horn to spread the order. "Cover each other. Retreat outside the town and regroup." The soldier nodded and raised his horn. He blew it twice, then another long horn. After hearing this, the squad leader began to shout orders to his own team to gather their soldiers. In fact, it was not easy, especially in a chaotic situation where both sides were entangled. Fortunately, the Rotterdam cavalry had made arrangements early in the morning, and their tactical execution was quite good. They took out chain-flying hammers that looked like hinges used for cannons. These little things with two round metal balls connected by chains in the middle was a simplified version of a tripwire. They were thrown directly at the leg of the Death Knight's horse. Under the effect of inertia, the small ball would naturally spin around the horse's leg. Regardless of whether it was a dead horse or a flaming horse, its speed would still be reduced. Most of the cavalries got rid of their opponents. The Hand of Silver was in charge of the rear position. The Death Knights who did not receive new orders chose to pursue. Just as the Alliance cavalry pulled away from the Death Knights, bright lights flashed on both sides of the hills. The Dalajan mages. Even when the main battlefield was at its most critical, Duque did not send out these killing weapons like the Pharaoh. Even when the ogre mages appeared on the battlefield and beat up the mages of the Storm King family and the Rotterdam kingdom on the two hills, Duque did not use them at all. Good steel should be used on the blade's edge. In Duque's opinion, a battle of attrition between a mage and a warlock was too boring. If he wanted to use it, he would use it to eliminate the enemy's elites. This was only the second battle at the Dark Portal. Before the Doomsday Army came out, the Death Knights of the Horde were very valuable. Although the bodies of these Death Knights belonged to Stormwind City, their souls were those of Gul'dan's warlocks who were killed by Orgrim. Only these warlocks could allow newborn Death Knights to easily grasp dark magic. It doesn't matter if these warlocks are high-ranked warlocks or apprentice warlocks, in any case, one dead is one less. As long as they die here, paladins can purify their souls, even Gul'dan can't resurrect them as Death Knights. The name of the battle this time was Beastman's Blood. With the amplification of the battle magic formation, the power and range of each mage's magic were greatly increased. The money spent on this magic formation alone was enough to equip an infantry regiment of 5,000 people. It was all worth it. The huge fireball that blotted out the sky and covered the earth poured down from the hills on both sides, leaving long trails of flames behind. That spectacular scene made countless people raise their eyebrows. Even the retreating Rotterdam cavalry and paladins of the Silver Hand couldn't help but be tongue-tied. It was too magnificent. The fireballs that poured down from both sides were like two huge waterfalls of fire, easily crossing the distance of hundreds of meters and blasting towards the Death Knights. The fireballs fell on the ruins of Southshore like a torrential rain, causing an effect that exceeded everyone's imagination. Southshore, which had become incomparably dilapidated after the battle between Antonidas and Gul'dan, was now injected with the elemental life force called flames and came to life. Everything surged with flames, and everything they touched was violently dyed in the color of flames, forming a scene that seemed like the end of the world. At first, the Death Knights who had lost their senses were still chasing the Alliance cavalry on their undead warhorses, but soon, they were drowned by the explosion. The terrifying explosion plowed through the ruins of Southshore again. After a round of attacks, there was nothing left to continue standing in the flames. Ha ha ha. Perish, dirty bones. Really go to hell, don't stand up again. The Rotterdam cavalry vented their frustrations from being suppressed just now. Even with the blessing of Uther's holy light, they could not fight like real paladins, after all. That had nothing to do with combat skills, and was purely suppressed by the evil power of the enemy. Now, they vented to their heart's content. Woo! 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 The horn sounded. It was a signal for all the cavalrymen to retreat. We're still retreating. Turayan frowned. Noxus laughed. Ha ha ha. Duque is really greedy, but I like it. Ha 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 ha. On the other side, Duque contacted Gina Goldsword directly through magic communication. Ms. Goldsword, how's General Daelin? Duque asked urgently. Coming. Almost in response to Daelin's confident answer, the sails of Curtila's fleet appeared in everyone's field of vision. The orcs were alarmed. Almost every orc commander realized that they were in big trouble. That's right, the coastline of South Shore was the widest, and the most suitable for a landing battle. The problem was that if they could not attack, the hundreds of thousands of orcs would all be squeezed on the narrow and long coastline. They would be the best targets for the fleet's cannons. On the flagship, seeing so many tribes squeezed on the coast, General Daelin was ecstatic. "Open all the cannons and use the grape shot. I want these green-skinned creatures to go to hell." It was early in the morning, and the wind was right. It was perfect for Curtila's fleet, which used sails. The sail, which was originally just a tiny dot, rapidly expanded in everyone's field of vision. There was a sudden burst of cheers that could turn the entire world upside down. "Hooray! Blast those bastard green-skinned creatures to death. Don't even think about charging over. Just stay down there and take the cannons." The orcs launched a desperate charge, trying to break through the defense line of the hill. Even the ogre mages were charging, but the Dalajan mages suppressed the ogre mages very well. Chapter 264. The Alliance soldiers stood tightly on the defensive line on the hill, holding their weapons steadily. Their spears were pointed diagonally downwards and stabbed at any approaching orcs. The soldiers formed a continuous shield wall, and the trained javelin soldiers kept throwing rain of death from the higher trenches. The orcs kept attacking these squads with absolute numbers, but they could not break through the Alliance's defensive line. At this moment, the sound of cannons rang out in the distance. Duque clenched his fists in excitement. This was what he wanted. Artillery and infantry coordination. Land and sea coordination. These two concepts were completely foreign to the world of Azeroth, but to Duque, who was a transmigrator and a fan of the fake military, it was like a drizzle. The cannons of this era had very big limitations. These primitive breech-loading cannons had a short range, and their power was limited. No general or marshal would have thought of asking the fleets that entered the battlefield later to help with the cannons. To the kings of the Alliance, as long as the Alliance could withstand this wave, it would be a very impressive victory. Who would have thought that Duque's appetite was so big that he actually wanted to swallow all 100,000 orcs? And it was about to come true. In the command center, the faces of the remaining 4 kings were filled with shock and awe. Kurtiras's complete First Fleet, the half-destroyed Third Fleet, the Fourth Fleet that was chased away by Lord Howl, and the Storm Fleet took advantage of Lord Howl's fight with the Windrunner sisters to approach the shore together. Their cannons were fully opened, and a sky full of bullets poured down on the shoreline that had turned green. A series of flashes quickly flashed across the ship in the distance, followed by rising black smoke that temporarily covered the entire ship. "It's here." Every Alliance soldier had an excited heart beating in their chest. When King Lang saw thousands of black lines across the morning blue sky from the top of the hill, he even forgot to continue to encourage his soldiers. Those steel beads mixed with the blazing aura of gunpowder intertwined with each other in the air. In some places, the steel beads were so densely packed that they actually collided with each other in the air, producing a series of crackling sounds. But there was no problem. It was as if God had scattered a large plate of black beans from the sky, sprinkling them on the beach with a piercing hum. Even though they knew that the next scene would be spectacular, the Storm Wind soldiers and the Rotterdam soldiers on the hill were still stunned by the scene in front of them. The terrifying shellfire plowed through the orcs on the beach. The place was originally crowded with green dwarves, but after a round of fire, only a few were left standing. A sieve-like formation appeared in front of the Alliance soldiers. Just as the Alliance soldiers thought that victory was at their fingertips, a voice suddenly rang out from the battlefield. It was a sentence that was continuously shouted out. Loch Taragar, he would rather die than win. Tens of thousands of orcs recovered from their shock and shouted the same slogan. The wills of tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands of orcs converged into one, turning into a raging tide. Unfortunately, this tide was extinguished before it could reach the Alliance's camp. Pass my order, use the firewall technique. Duque ordered coldly. Dalaran's mages immediately released a high wall of flames on the hillside of the two Alliance mountains. Wall of Fire was not a spell with a good price-performance ratio. To maintain the wall of flames, they had to constantly inject mana. For low-level mages, maintaining it for a few minutes would deplete all their mana. In most battles, this spell was not very practical. However, at this crucial moment, the appearance of the firewall technique extinguished the last thoughts of the horde. The orc warriors were not paladins who could temporarily rely on the holy light to become invincible. How much combat power could they have if they risked their lives to charge through the firewall? This attack directly smashed the morale of the horde. Finally, the horde's retreat horn sounded. Retreat? How could it be so easy to retreat after landing on the beach? Duque did not know who the commander of the horde was this time, but he was sure that Orgrim was not here. However, it was not easy for the horde to retreat. Their only path of survival was in the direction of the East Beach, because they knew that the Alliance's tight defense line was still there if they retreated to the west coast. Moreover, the sea facing the west coast was deep water. As long as Cortira's fleet was there, they would not be able to board the transport ship back alive. The east side was different. Even though the entire coast from South Shore to Tangarok in the southeast were guarded by Stormwind soldiers. The sea facing the east coast was shallow water with a depth of less than 3 meters. The Alliance's ships could not enter, and this was the Horde's only hope. In fact, the Horde was retreating in that direction, and the transport ship was also moving in that direction, ready to receive the Horde's warriors. However, it was not that easy. Maugre, have your merpeople go to the sea facing the east beach to snipe the orcs. Gu, yes, master. Without waiting for Duque's order, Lothar personally led the cavalry to chase after the orcs when they retreated. This was a rare opportunity to beat the orcs when they were down. Other than Lang, who did not dare to advance too recklessly, who continued to defend his own hill and continued to attack the horde passing by, the bombardment had already extended to the east beach. On the hill to the west, Mograine and Abendis had already led their troops down like ferocious tigers, chasing after the horde's tail. On the entire battlefield, the battle was nearing its end. Looking down from the sky, the silver torrent representing the Alliance was in a semi-encirclement, chasing after the remaining green parts along the coastline. The horde had sent out many troops to cover the rear, but none of them could hold on for long. They were quickly torn apart by the fierce bombardment of the Alliance's long-range weapons and the fierce impact of the Alliance's army. They were quickly swallowed up by the human torrent. In the Alliance's command, thunderous cheers were heard. This was the first victory since the establishment of the Alliance, and it was also a rather great victory. Congratulations, Deputy Chief Marcus. The most excited king of Stormguard, Tolbane, was the first to shake hands with Duque. The Alliance's victory would undoubtedly greatly reduce the pressure on Riptide Fortress. No matter how good the defense of Sodder Bridge was, being besieged every day was not a long-term solution. Thank you. Duque smiled. The second to come up was King Terina's. Sure enough, it's the world of the young now. Kalia misses you very much, come to Lordaeron more often when you have time. The king of Lordaeron's words were clear. Duque forced a smile and nodded, yes, I will definitely go when I have time. Yes, I am very busy. The third was King Xion. Now it's good, at least we taught those green-skinned creatures a lesson. I don't have to worry about waking up with a bunch of green-skinned creatures on the kingdom's beach. There are still many orcs, we need to continue working hard. The last was King Eden. This Alterac king had always given Duque the impression of being gloomy, cunning, and astute. Just as Eden was about to say something, a sudden change occurred. A sharp long sword pierced through Duque's chest. At. Chapter 265. You should be able to hear me, right? I'm sorry, I admire your wisdom, but if you don't die, the beastmen will not be able to rule this world. A quick and clear beastman language came from behind Duque. Every word entered Duque's ears, reminding Duque of who killed him. Fireblade Clan. Duke's heart was completely cut in half by the sharp blade. He coughed up blood, and blood spurted out from the gaps between his teeth that were full of blood. You really know our tribe well. It seemed to be a sigh, but it also seemed to have made up its mind. With a twist of the blade, a cold light burst forth from Duke's chest, splitting Duke's entire body into two halves. King Alterac Eden was dumbfounded. Perhaps he was very resourceful and full of ideas, but he had never been a courageous and daring king. This was something all kings looked down on. Seeing the Star of the Alliance, who was about to shake hands with him, suddenly killed, King Eden collapsed to the ground, tears and snot flowing out of his eyes. The other three kings were also stunned. Tyrrhena's was frozen in fear, while Jean and Salas pulled out their swords at lightning speed. Psh! More than 10 sounds rang out, as if they were the same note. Inside the hall were the dignitaries of various countries. Although many generals had already left the mountain, the dignitaries never lacked guards. Unfortunately, these sounds came from the chests or throats of the guards. More than 10 guards were assassinated on the spot by the sudden appearance of the orc. Among all the guards, only Windsor and Gavinrad activated divine protection to block this fatal blow. Even though there were over 1,000 guards and attendants outside the command center, at this moment, in this enormous command center, there were only the 4 kings, Windsor and Gavinrad left, a total of 6 living people. The king's pupils contracted as they finally saw their enemies. They were all tall, with ferocious faces and protruding fangs. They carried large flags with domineering words on their backs, and held 3-foot-long burning blades in their hands. They were all sword saints of the Fireblade clan. They had crossed the entire battlefield in an unimaginable way and arrived at the headquarters of the Alliance, which was overlooking the ocean. There, they had planned a decapitation strategy. I was too careless. He was too careless. The impending victory had paralyzed everyone. The soldiers could not wait to participate in the pursuit and taste the first great victory of the human alliance against the orc tribe. No one had expected the other party to be so sinister. This was worse than the last time Ryan was ambushed. If more than half of the kings of the alliance fell here, the country that lost the king would inevitably fall into chaos, and the alliance would inevitably collapse. No matter what great victory Lothar achieved on the front line, it would not help. To the tribe, these sword saints of the Fireblade clan were so close to becoming heroes. Just a little bit more. The only thing they didn't expect was that Duque would be resurrected. The surrounding air instantly dropped to the freezing point, and a tornado-like blizzard appeared in the blink of an eye. The sword saints had long since realized that something was wrong, but the snowflakes in front of them were so large that they could not even see their own fingers. It had to be said that the leading sword saint was definitely a top-notch expert. He did not hesitate for even half a second and immediately pulled out Blade Storm. The sword saints of the Fireblade clan would definitely know how to deal with this move, but it was a different matter for humans. In such a narrow space, there was no space to dodge at all, and it was not just one Blade Storm, but more than 10. All the sword saints used their ultimate moves at the same time as if they had a tacit understanding. Even if these sword saints were not as powerful as the leading sword saint, the blade storm that was blasted out was not to be underestimated. Looking at the sword light that filled their vision, even though they knew that there was a mage protecting them, all the kings were scared out of their wits. Scram! A loud roar sounded like thunder from the sky, causing everyone's eardrums to ring. The next moment, the entire ground of the command center exploded with dozens of huge ice prisms. The kings suddenly felt as if they were in the middle of a snow-colored forest. They immediately came back to their senses, and they had a question in their minds. Where were those damn sword saints of the orcs? The stone ceiling was pierced through by a large pile of ice prisms. The sword saints were also sent flying. Spin! Aren't you all very good at spinning? I'll let you guys spin around as much as you want. On the ground, Duke's figure appeared from the dissipating white fog, pointing at the sky and cursing. Yes, using one's high-speed spinning to create countless sword auras that were as sharp as blades was indeed very awesome. Don't forget, the blade storm of the sword saints came from spinning, and spinning required a fulcrum to stand on. What Duque did was to send all these fulcrum flying into the air. The sword saints were so depressed that they wanted to vomit blood. What happened to the promise of eating the king's heads together tonight? What happened to the promise of using their ultimate moves to destroy the heavens, the earth, and the air? The legendary ultimate move that would definitely cause a bloodbath had all become a fool's one-man show. It was not that they did not want to stop, but this kind of terrifying ultimate move that erupted all of their energy in an instant was not something that could be stopped easily. They also wanted to move away from the ice prisms under their feet and then slash at Duque. But the ice prisms under their feet continued to thicken and extend, not letting them fall. As a result, under the gaze of thousands of Alliance soldiers, the roof of the Alliance's headquarters was lifted off, and then more than a dozen small tornadoes of sword blades spun continuously in the air. It was not known whether this scene was terrifying or funny. This situation directly alarmed many soldiers who were chasing at the front lines. Not good. Every general's face was pale. Stop. Everyone, return. Turayan shouted nervously. Wait. Noxus stopped Turayan's recklessness. What can we do if we go back now? Duque should be fine. If he's here. Almost at the same time, the mages responsible for communications around every general received a message from Duque. All the important personnel are fine. The headquarters is under attack. Crisis. Thuzad is back. Duque was very calm and very clear-headed. If he called for the cavalry to return now, they would definitely not make it in time. But the two pharaohs were another matter. A series of flash lights lit up on both sides of the mountain. There was no time to lock onto the coordinates of the teleportation, so the two famous pharaohs of the future used the fastest and most violent method, using flash continuously to hurry on their way. Low-ranked mages had to rest and adjust their magic circuits after each use of flash, but there were no such restrictions for Radiant Moon mages. While others could travel 20 yards with a blink, these two fellows could travel 200 yards with a single blink. Moreover, they didn't even need to pause. They were practically burning with anxiety. Originally, Duque had planned to hold out until the two of them returned, but Duque suddenly found an opportunity. Chapter 266. The system elf spoke, which was rare, dear host. Do you want to eat them alone? I've scanned them and found that they seem to have skill books that you can use. The system elf was connected to Duque's brain, and this kind of brainwave communication took almost no time. Skill book? Why would a mage like me need a blade master's skill book? I'm tired of carrying such a big kitchen knife. I don't know, but their energy fluctuations are similar to yours. If you can kill them alone, you might be able to extract the skill book from the energy in their bodies. Wow! That's possible. At this moment, Duque was excited. Duque yelled loudly. What skills did a blade master have? There were so many blade master's skills. But the core of a blade master were still those 4 skills. Gale Step could make a blade master invisible and increase his movement speed. If a blade master attacked a target while invisible, it would cause additional damage and reveal himself. This was much more powerful than a thief's invisibility. Mirror Image could create an illusion of a blade master to confuse the opponent and eliminate all unfavorable magic effects. Critical Strike could increase the probability of a blade master dealing more damage when attacking. Needless to say, Blade Storm, the rapidly rotating blades could easily injure all enemy ground troops in the vicinity, and also made the Sword Saint immune to magic. Any one of these 4 skills could bring great help to Duque. For a moment, great ambition surged into Duque's heart. Fight tycoons. Distribute land. Oh, no. It should be, fight the boss. Rob his mother. At this moment, Duque's mind was unprecedentedly focused, completely from the greed in his heart, from the desire for power, and from the anger of being killed. It was a very magical and very strange slight distortion of the mind. He didn't even notice that a few things flashed in the system notification: detected, greed, in the 7 major sins, activated, you have developed a strong greed for something. Due to your human nature, exploding state. Greed, changed from a negative soul state to a positive soul state. Transforming in progress. You have obtained temporary special abilities, plunder, and luck. Plunder, you can obtain more spoils of war from the enemies you kill. Note, this can be beyond the concept of physics. Luck, even living enemies can become your luck. Because they are your potential for advancement. When luck is activated, you will get a higher chance of critical hits and better item drops. Duque didn't notice, he really didn't notice. He only knew that his magic had been activated. Just as the Blade Masters ended their Blade Storm, the Blade Masters were activated. A large amount of water elemental energy rushed into Duke's ice barrier, and with the help of Rapid Avalanche, the place where the Sword Saints were standing was turned into a giant ice ball that was held up by dozens of ice pillars. A translucent ice film sealed off all entrances and exits. Inside, the temperature was dropping rapidly. At the same time, a huge clockwise snowstorm swept up everything inside. The Sword Saints were so depressed that they vomited blood. Of all times, the enemy had unleashed it. That unreasonable ice tornado did not seem like something a sky wizard could do. It was a morning star, no, a radiant moon. They weren't strong in terms of freezing air. The problem was that Duque had placed a large number of palm-sized round ice flakes in the barrier. In terms of freezing air, it was not considered strong, but the problem was that Duque had placed a large number of palm-sized round ice shards inside the barrier, and under the sweeping of the ice storm, these ice shards all became the most lethal blades, crazily cutting their bodies. Under normal circumstances, the Blade Masters could have used all sorts of methods to avoid the attack before the spell was formed. However, Duque just had to wait for them to finish casting their ultimate spells. If it were any other enemy, they could have used Gale Steps to escape. But where could they run to now? Because they were weak, they were sucked into the ice storm and lost control of their own bodies. A Sword Saint was definitely an elite among the Beast Men. Compared to other Beast Men, a Sword Saint's attack power, speed, and agility were all maximized. Chopping down trees and boulders would only require one slash. In comparison, their defense and vitality were at the level of an ordinary human. After casting their ultimate spells, the Blade Master was even weaker than an ordinary human. The ice blades continuously created wounds on their bodies. Very soon, the first Blade Master lost his life. The second, the third, the leading Blade Master's eyes were bloodshot, and he let out a ferocious roar. Loktarogar. Even though he was weak, even though his arms were sore and limp, even though every time he swung his blade, he still attacked. Relying on his physique that was stronger than the other Sword Saints, he suddenly stepped on a piece of ice that was already floating in the air. Using the seemingly insignificant reaction force, he shot out of the ice shield's range like a falling meteor. You. Only you, must die. There were countless bloodstains on the Blade Master's face. The wounds caused by the sharp ice blades were already covered with frost. Before he broke through the barrier, the ice blades cut his face again and again. The wounds on his chest were already disorderly, like a piece of rotten meat that was about to be chopped up. There was only a small section of the red flag left on his back. Only the long blade was still astonishingly bright. Only the remaining blood red eye was surging with endless fighting spirit. Duque raised his head and calmly stared at the Blade Master who risked his life to launch a fatal attack on him. Duque suddenly admired him. Not everyone had the courage to enter the enemy's rear and kill the enemy's leader. Not everyone had the courage to launch a suicidal charge against the enemy when there was still a chance to escape. If he had chosen to escape, perhaps Duque might not have been able to catch him. But after seeing his brother die in battle, he chose to die together with Duque. He was a hero. Unfortunately, the enemy's hero was my enemy's enemy. Flames were not fatal to the Fireblade clan. Duque's ice circuit had been used up in the huge ice storm, so the only thing left was arcane spells. No longer caring about hiding, the 108 hands of magic formed a huge cloister. One end was the Blade Master leader, and the other end was Duque. If he wanted to kill his way to Duque, he had to use the arcane blast from these hands of magic. The dense barrage completely exceeded the limits of what the Blade Master leader could withstand. In less than a tenth of a second, the Blade Master leader was turned into a sieve and fell heavily. Chapter 267. However, the Sword Saint leader was not dead yet. He fell to the ground, and blood flowed out from all the wounds on his body. Soon, the already red floor was dyed red. He raised his head and opened his remaining eye. He opened his mouth with 3 broken fangs. Human mage, the one you killed is the chieftain of the Fireblade clan, Dar Triple Bloodblade. May I know your name? Dar said in the Beastman language in a deep voice as he coughed up blood. Duke Marcus, the deputy commander of the Rotterdam Alliance, Duque replied in the human language. So it's you. The great chief of the Fireblade clan slowly closed his eyes. Duque fell silent. A few seconds later, the kings, Windsor, and Gavin Rad, who had come back to their senses, let out angry roars with complicated meanings. Oh, was this the joy of surviving a disaster? Was this a roar praising a hero? Or could it be both? No one knew. Anyway, when the guards on the mountainside nervously rushed over with their swords in hand, and the 2 Kirin Tor counselors rushed over with their lives on the line, what they saw was a bloody and unexpected scene. In the sky, the remains of the Beastman Sword Saint that had already been cut into pieces fell to the ground. On the ground, the bodies of the king's guards and attendants lay everywhere. Miraculously, not a single truly important person died in this assassination. Perhaps the kings were like Eden, paralyzed and trembling amidst the bloodstains. Perhaps trembling like Tarina's and finding a chair to sit in. Or perhaps they were like Zeon and Salas, leaning on their swords and gasping for breath. The guards were in a mess, not knowing what to do. Calm down. The assassins have all been killed by me. The leader was the chieftain of the Fireblade clan, Dar Triple Bloodblade. It was all right now. Don't panic. All the guards formed a defensive formation to protect their king. I'm not sure if there are any assassins left. Pausing for a moment, Duque sat down dejectedly. Krasis, I'll leave this place to you. Inform Lothar that the army will be under his command. Kel Thuzad, I'll have to trouble you to go back and oversee the mages. After arranging everything, Windsor hurried over to support the limp Duque. Master, are you all right? I'm fine. I'm just a little exhausted. Those sword saints are not easy to deal with. Are you hurt? Gavin Rad's face was burning. Just now, he couldn't do anything. Under divine protection, he could not use any weapons. He might be able to use the holy light to heal the kings, but the problem was that if the kings were killed instantly, his holy light would be useless. No. It's just that my magic circuits are a bit messed up. I'll be fine after some rest. Duque looked weak on the outside, but he was so happy that he wanted to jump up and shout, "Yours truly is rich. Yours truly is rich. Yours truly is rich." There was no reason for it. It was because of the few paragraphs in the system prompt. Congratulations, host. You have extracted a mysterious power from the souls of the Sword Saints of the Fireblade clan. You have obtained the secret of Mirror Image. You can now use the advanced version of Mirror Image, True Mirror Image. Your temporary special abilities, Plunder, and Luck, have come into play. You have extracted the true essence of Blade Storm, from the soul of Dar Triple Blood Blade. Your Ice Shield and Rapid Avalanche have combined into a new combination skill, Blade Storm. Blade Storm, this is the magical version of the Blade Storm. You can condense the cold aura into countless sharp and frightening blades, slowing down and cutting all enemies within the range of the storm into pieces. The power will increase as your ice circuit is strengthened. However, this is a very extreme magic. As a price, your fully activated ice circuit will be overloaded for a short period of time. You will not be able to use any ice magic for the next 3 days. What is this? This is clearly a killer weapon. Whoosh! I hate that I don't have a high-level ice circuit. Otherwise, the power of this move would be many, many times greater. Thinking of this, Duque felt a little resentful again. The Sun King's arcane fire circuit was indeed amazing, but the problem was that there was no ice magic. Duque rummaged through Mediva's lair for a long time, but he couldn't find an advanced mode for practicing the ice circuit. Involuntarily, Duque thought of Frost Grandpa Antonidas. Antonidas was proficient in all 3 elements, but he preferred to use water and ice magic. Just by looking at his insane number of water elemental summoning spells, one could tell how powerful his ice circuit was. But it doesn't seem to be easy. Duque's mind was a little messy. When he came back to his senses, the entire South Shore, no, the entire Hillsbrad Hills were boiling. We won. Long live Anduin Lothar. Long live Duke Marcus. The huge sound waves formed wave after wave of angry waves, wantonly attacking everyone's eardrums. From the northernmost refugee camp, to the gathering place of the reserve troops, to the vicinity of the headquarters, to the 2 hills that had just experienced a bloody battle, to the beach, and even to the battleship that was on the sea, everyone raised their fists or weapons high in the air. Long spears were like a forest, and swords were like the sea. Thousands of wills converged into one sentence, long live the Alliance. Whose tears were flying? Who was venting their sorrow? The orcs, who had thought that they were invincible, were finally beaten into the hell of losers under the united efforts of the 7 major human kingdoms. Their corpses were thousands of miles away. Those ugly and ferocious faces were stiff because they had lost their lives. Those huge and frightening bodies covered the entire ground of South Shore, the entire beach, and half of the sea. The terrifying legend of the orcs' invincibility was shattered today, right here and now. Long live! The cheers of thousands of soldiers and civilians were like a tsunami, soaring into the sky. Long live! The loud cheers seemed to have brought the entire human world back to the past. Under the banner of Thoradin the Great, everyone was united, and they were invincible. The 4 human kings walked over, and this time, they did not shake hands, but hugged. If not for Duque, they would have all died under the blades of the Fireblade clan, and their noble lives would have become the new legend of the Fireblade clan. Unfortunately, it was because there was no if that the alliance could continue. Old Terenas patted Duque's back and whispered, I owe you one. If Stormwind is unable to restore your kingdom, come to me. I can lend you 100,000 soldiers. Wherever you conquer, that will be your territory. Thank you, Your Majesty Menethil. If that day really comes, I will ask you for this favor. You're tuning in to the Blissful Bookshelf YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.